here we go. This is a great episode with Robbie Davidson. Make sure to enjoy it. Make sure to do it. Here we go. Get your minds blown.
I think there are a good number of things that cannot be scientifically proven, but that we're all rational to accept. Let me list 5. Logical and mathematical truths cannot be proven by science. Science presupposes logic and math, so that to try to prove them by science would be arguing in a circle. Metaphysical truths, like there are other minds other than my own, or that the external world is real, or that the past was not created 5 minutes ago with an appearance of age, are rational beliefs that cannot be scientifically proven. Ethical beliefs about statements of value are not accessible by the scientific method. You can't show by science whether the Nazi scientists in the camps did anything evil as opposed to the scientists in Western democracies. Aesthetic judgments, number 4, cannot be accessed by the scientific method because the beautiful, like the good, cannot be scientifically proven. And finally, most remarkably, would be science itself. Science cannot be justified by the scientific method. Science is permeated with unprovable assumptions. For example, in the special theory of relativity, the whole theory hinges on the assumption that the speed of light is constant in a one-way direction between any 2 points A and B. But that strictly cannot be proven. We simply have to assume that in order to hold to the theory.
So put that in your pipe and smoke it.
This is Canary Cry Radio.
Hey everybody, you're listening to Canary Cry Radio, and my name's Basil.
And this is Gons. Welcome to episode number 117. Did I say that right? Yeah, 117.
I guess, yeah. No, I'm confused, but yeah, there you go. That sounds about right.
Yep. Could everything we've been taught about life and the world be wrong? Is the scientific establishment of today more or less a religious movement led by priests in lab coats and acting as gatekeepers of knowledge? If so, how are we as Christians to understand the difference between the scientific method, which clearly shows some progress and some evidence that it works, and this contemporary sort of spiritual movement called Scientism? Well, here to help us understand these questions and other topics is the man behind the Celebrate Truth YouTube channel, and he's made tons of videos, and they've been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. He's had a good amount of views on a video called Flat Earth: Truth of the UFO Alien Deception, The Global Lie, and most recently, Scientism Exposed. He's getting ready to release Scientism Exposed Part 2. Robbie Davidson, thanks for coming on the show, buddy.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here.
Absolutely. Now, before we get too extreme into the details here, it's always interesting to find out how people got into, kind of starting their own little part of the whatever movement they're involved in. Because, as far as, believe it or not, us podcasters and YouTubers and researchers, we're fairly normal people before we get all crazy. Yeah. So how'd you get your start? Kind of what's your background, and tell us a little about yourself. What do you like to do on a sunny summer afternoon?
Well, a little bit about my story. I mean, I was raised not in a Christian home, and I believed a lot of the the scientism of the day, and I think that would be one of the big indicators of me basically walking away, rejecting the Bible or any of the kind of claims that they had, because I'm like, if they can't get, things right from Genesis, I mean, how can I trust this book? So things just, looking and ridiculing, like the account of the flood or the Noah's Ark. I mean, how you fit all those animals, just simple things like this, but really in my brain laughing at it through the scientific, studies. So, I really walked away, and I would say, for most of my life, I led a really incredibly ungodly lifestyle. Sex, drugs, rock and roll. I was pretty wild. I mean, I was to the point where I used to find joy in actually seeing if I could make Christians cry, like women, just because, I thought it was so pathetic that they were waiting until they were married or that they didn't swear or whatever. But again, I just would, have these pot shots and just be able to, really just get in there and ridicule. And I just thought it was just a joke, So for me, it was one of those things. So there was a friend I got to know, and he was a little bit different. And I remember one time we were just talking, and all of a sudden he says, "Oh, it's getting late. I got to go to church tomorrow." I'm like, "Your parents make you go to church?" And he's like, "No, I want to go to church." I'm like, "What? You want to go to church? What are you talking about?" Like, I just couldn't even comprehend it. Well, anyways, that conversation turned into like a 6-hour talk, and we got into eschatology, and we got into some really fascinating things. But I remember one thing that he had said, and I said, it's all good, because I wouldn't go so far as to say I was an atheist, but I'd say I was an agnostic. Hey, I'm a good person. You know what I mean? I'm okay. I believe in God. As long as I believe in God, then I'm good. And he's like, "No, it's more than that. You got to have a relationship and stuff." So that kind of stuck with me. And anyways, but nothing really happened after that. It's just I went back to my lifestyle, drinking and partying in the club scene. And it was a few nights afterwards I had this kind of spiritual encounter where all of a sudden it was just instantly like at, I don't know, it was about 3 a.m, woke up and there was this presence around me. And it was like, I remember just holding out my hands and saying, "I'm coming to you." That was it. Woke up the next morning, and I was actually sleeping in the basement of my parents' house at that point. I was at 21 at this point, just sleeping on the couch. And when I woke up, they had all these VHS tapes of all these old movies, but the one that was glowing was Jesus. The film Jesus? It's like glowing. I went to it, I grabbed it, I put it into the VCR, I watched the entire movie, and at the end, I basically got on my knees in tears, and I just basically gave my life. And then since then, it's just been just absolutely incredible. I mean, God's led me into so many different ministries. I went off to Bible college. I worked in prison ministry, did youth ministry. I did like evangelism. I really got into apologetics because part of me was, I needed to know this was the truth. This wasn't just a belief that I always tell people. It doesn't matter what you believe. What matters is what the truth is. So for me, it was a really important part of my journey was getting into apologetics. And one of the things was getting into creation science. And that, Kent Hovind and other great, ministries that were out there. It was just profound to start now finally really looking into like Noah's Ark, or look into creation and look into all these inconsistencies, that evolution being one of the biggest. Because again, we were told, we evolved from monkeys. This is exactly, scientific proof, and this is reality, and there's no debate. But when you started breaking it down, wait a minute, this isn't just reality. This isn't just conclusive through the scientific method. We got major holes. So I think Kent Hovind and other people like that did a fantastic job. I had an opportunity to meet Kent when he came to my church probably about 17, 18 years ago. And he gave a seminar, and it was just amazing, just going through all of that. And so that led me into, getting into that, getting into eschatology. I'm still excited and fascinated by eschatology. Then getting into the research of like the Nephilim or Genesis 6. And for me, it was a big deal when it came to all of this investigation, because while I was being led to, spiritual warfare and just different facets of different areas, I was always fascinated by the way Satan works in this world. And I found it interesting how, many, many Christians, I believe in Satan. Yeah, he possesses people. He's real. But they didn't understand how big and how complex and how he was working with very powerful families and stuff. So I started really researching a lot of that and finding out how, it's not just people in robes. These people are wearing ties and suits. This is pretty sophisticated in the agencies that are set up, in the people groups. And, going down that path, getting even into 9/11, kind of seeing behind it, seeing how pretty much everyone, of these major elite families were Luciferian, and just tying it all together, studying the New Age, studying Satanism, really understanding, okay, in order to understand how this all works, or to get a really good proper perspective, I've got to study the other side as well too. So really studying, where are these guys' agendas? What, getting into Aleister Crowley, or getting into Alice Bailey, or getting into all these teachers. And I really wanted to formulate this understanding of my eschatology, but also what was kind of, the one world order and all these sort of things. But to me, it was really important to see how it was all coming together, which led me to the most recent stuff that I've really spent a lot of time researching and looking into, but really going into it and saying, wait a minute, okay, so, evolution is one of the most disastrous lies out there. It destroys the significance. It takes out a lot of significance with what's written in the Bible. But where does evolution come from? Like, let's follow this back. And when you go into the Big Bang, what I found fascinating for years and years, I would just attach God to the bang, because I'd run into like an atheist. And I'd say, guys, okay, you guys believe nothing exploded and created everything, okay? I believe it's intelligent design. Who's stupider here, right? Kind of thing. So what I would do is I just attach God to the Big Bang. But when I started studying the whole heliocentric Big Bang cosmology, I found some major, major errors and problems throughout the whole thing. And then linking it in throughout history, you find out, with Copernicus, and you're getting into Pythagoras, and you start studying these really pivotal times in history where everything was shaken and moved into a new direction. And most of these people, they were in the mystery schools. They were getting it through the occult. They were getting some very esoteric kind of knowledge. And I find it fascinating how you kind of put this plan all together. And if you're Lucifer and Satan, you're going to plan for generations. You're not going to plan for a year or like maybe even a decade. You're going to plan for a long period of time because it takes a while to saturate it. So I just found it very fascinating. For me, being a truth seeker, obviously following the one that claimed to be the way, the truth, and the life. And I've said many times before, the biggest thing that I came down to was examining the claims of Jesus, because either he is who he said he is or he's not. And I love the C.S. Lewis quote, where it's either he's a lunatic, he's a liar, or he's Lord. There is no room for anything else. You can't say he's a good teacher or he's a prophet. He didn't leave us open to that. So I love the fact of being able to talk to someone and say, look, that's all you really need to focus on, because, again, he's the only person that claimed to be the embodiment of truth, not just, hey, I'll tell you the truth. I am the truth. I am the way. So to me, in all this quest for truth, when it came to reality or creation or whatever, to me, the most significant thing is spiritually, what is the truth? Because the spiritual truth of the matter is Jesus is the creator of all creation. And to me, it was a very important topic that God has led me to here in the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's interesting how science was such a big part and is such a big part of the, the not believing in God, or, holding a firm atheism, or even the justification for an agnosticism, worldview. And it's interesting that going through and picking out the Big Bang and equating, equating it in conversation with God, or using that as a jumping off point, was kind of part of your strategy there. And it, because the scientific argument, that really is the biggest argument that comes up in conversation. Really, without the sort of scientific, exclusively scientific worldview, there's really not much to say about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the one thing that I wanted to make sure that when I came out with Scientism Exposed, I wanted to make the distinction, and I want maybe, all your listeners to know this as well. When they hear this interview, I'm not anti-science. And a lot of people that are basically making these claims, we love science. Science, the true scientific method, is wonderful. It's great. There's no problem there. What we have a problem with, however, is scientism. So opening up the film, I wanted to make sure that I drew the distinction between what's the difference between science and scientism. Because unfortunately, a lot of the things that are being taught to our children, just in general, that we assume that, they ought to be scientific, or whatever. They're not. They are theory. And I believe that it gets even more sinister in the sense that there's an agenda, there is a deception, and it's all been masqueraded under the banner of truth and reality, and there's no debate. To me, it's almost ingenious, and why I think it's so important is because everyone's worldview is being formed by scientism. So as a child, it doesn't even matter whether you're a Christian or agnostic or atheist or Muslim or Buddhist, it doesn't matter. Everyone's worldview is shaped by this one construct that is basically taught at a very early age. We're taught all of this stuff very, very early on, and no one really questions it. No one just questions it. But when you start actually researching this, you find it very, very intriguing how this all kind of comes together. And I understand for a lot of people, myself included, when I came to some of this content matter, I laughed it off. I thought it was a joke. I said, you got to be kidding me. And almost everyone that comes to this laughs at it, or just think this is just out to lunch. Before this topic, I would say that the moon landing was probably the most outrageous in quote unquote conspiracy circles. So for me, and I didn't believe they landed on the moon for a long time. And, I always make the case that if people are seriously questioning the moon landing, they're probably going to be open enough to really look at some other things and be okay with it. But if you believe they landed on the moon 100%, some of this information that we'll be talking about tonight might be very hard for you to digest. It totally makes sense. But for me, it was like the moon landing was probably the most outrageous just out there. A lot of people would talk about different conspiracies and stuff, but really that was the one that was way out there. Well, this one and this content matter is even further than that. So it's almost like the moon itself, and I tell people this all the time. I say, look, just really look into that moon landing, because here's the question, hypothetically, if they didn't land on the moon and if they can't go that far, the question is, where have they gone? how far can they go? It opens up the thing. I say that to people all the time. I say, don't you find it strange that in the 1960s, they went 240,000 miles away? Okay, so 250,000 miles. Since then, and anybody can look this up on Google, do it right now as we're speaking. The furthest that man has gone is 400 miles. 43 years, almost 50 years, and the furthest that man has gone is 400 miles. It's a fraction of a percent. I mean, they're telling us that in technology, that basically an iPhone 3 has more power, megahertz power in an iPhone 3 than what the Apollo had. They're telling us that they went 250,000 miles away. But what I find very suspicious is the fact that they've only gone 400 miles since then. So things like this, it needs to be brought up in the sense of really look into this, because it's like, wait a minute, whoa, what's going on here? There has to be something going on. So I always say, hypothetically, just like the Bible with these verses that we'll be bringing up tonight, hypothetically, if you just try it, what happens? What happens when a child reads the Bible, and what kind of worldview would they construct if they had no scientism, if you weren't telling them anything, they just read all the creation verses and they were going to draw it? What would they draw? And to me, it's like it would be very dangerous almost and not right if God was going to deceive all the children. I mean, Jesus talked very highly about let the children come to me, and it talks about having faith like a child. So sometimes we almost need to come down a little bit and go, you know what, I'm going to read this like a child. How would a child read this? And it's just plain. A lot of these verses are plain, but unfortunately, they didn't work with our construct. They didn't work with our worldview, so therefore we made them poetic or allegory. So to me, it's just very intriguing. But I definitely think that the moon landing, it is a very pivotal point in anyone's journey, truth-seeking, conspiracy circles, whatever you want to do. But anytime you look into it, you got to figure out where you stand on that, because I think that if you start questioning that and you find some things that really aren't adding up, start looking beyond that, because the big question is, if they didn't go there, why would they lie? And I think that's the biggest thing that people have a hard time with, is too big a lie, or, there's no point. What would be the point? And I think this is why it's so important, because I think the question on why they would lie really brings a lot of these things together.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, that is like the kind of truther 101 right next to 9/11 there.
Yeah, exactly. And I say, and I always say to people sometimes, like, wherever you are in your walk and in being a truther, if all of a sudden you're still stuck up on 9/11, you believe the official story of 9/11, well, good luck even getting into the NASA, or talking about the moon landing. I mean, you're still there. So it's almost like you need to go on baby steps. So I talk to people sometimes that sometimes we're excited. We want to jump people to the Nephilim, but sometimes we almost have to start really almost baby steps and go through it. Are they tracking? Do they believe that JFK, there might have been multiple shooters or whatever? Okay, where do you believe on 9/11? If they're open on 9/11, then you kind of keep going. But it's like a scale. And I always bring this up because I think it's important, because sometimes we're talking to people and we're bringing up really heavy duty level stuff, and they're not even at the 9/11. They haven't even digested the fact that that's pretty evil. I mean, you stop and think about 9/11 and the very fact that, there's evil in this world that would actually even basically be able to do something like that. And I think it's hard for people to digest that, especially a lot of people that are in the church or whatever, and thinking that, the government are good Christian people and they're, looking out for us and stuff like that. So I think all of these topics get really shady, because again, I don't know if a lot of people want to believe that we live in such an evil, corrupt world, but the Bible clearly says it, that Satan is the god of this world. And when you start looking around, it starts to make sense when you look at the top agencies, not to mention, if you look at all the verses in the Bible that talk about the world's wisdom, or talk about the wisdom of the world. If you actually stopped right now and thought about it, who would you say would be the wisest people that we look up to today? And I would say it's the scientists. I'd say it's the astrophysicists. I'd say it's the rocket scientists. These type of people are basically the smart people. They're the ones with the big degrees, and they have all the calculations, and they go on to these programs. But if you look at what God says about the world's wisdom, he doesn't just sit there and say it's wrong or evil. He says it's foolishness. It's foolish. So for him to strike a parallel like that, or actually a contrast in the sense that it's so completely the opposite, could it be that the stuff that they're saying is so incredibly crazy, it's so far off base, that God's saying it's foolishness, it's laughable with what they're trying to tell you? And, that he's actually, it breaks his heart, the fact that we would listen to the wisdom of men rather than what God has plainly put in the Bible. I mean, it's a question, and that's all I do to tell people, to say, hey, just look into it, because it's very fascinating when just hypothetically you try it and say, what would happen if I was to take all the creation verses literally? What would happen? What's amazing about it is nothing contradicts. You get a complete worldview construct that it really starts forming together. It's not like, some of these things still don't add up. It all starts coming together. And then, furthermore, it really starts to, make more sense with the Tower of Babel. It starts to make sense now with the flood. I mean, you're talking 3 water sources, the water above the heavens, and the fountains of the deep. But if you read the account in the flood, it talks about 3 water sources. And the Bible is very clear, even after the flood, that water still exists, in the firmament, above the firmament. And it said that the firmament was put in place to divide the waters from the waters. Now, I know there's canopy theories and there's all these things, but could it be that there is big bodies of water, just above us? These are the type of questions that just get very fascinating. But when you start reading the Bible and you start putting it together and then going to other stories, like I said, the Tower of Babel, getting into even extra biblical texts that are Holy Spirit inspired, like First Enoch or Jasher, it gets even more profound. I'd say and most people got into the whole Nephilim Genesis 6 thing with the book of Enoch. Well, I don't think a lot of people, myself included, knew that there's way more about creation in the book of Enoch than there is even about the Nephilim or the Watchers. So when you actually look at the creation, you either have to discount it and say, Enoch didn't have a clue what he's talking about here. He's ignorant, just like the rest of them. Or you have to sit there and say, wait a minute, what's he talking about here? Because he clearly talks about a lot of movement chambers. He talks about a lot of very interesting things that some investigators and people have gone down that road. And it started to construct some really interesting things, not to mention the book of Jasher, explaining that the Tower of Babel, they were literally looking for the openings because they wanted to kind of get up there so that they could kill God. I mean, it's evil, but it starts to kind of put this, because I never could actually fully figure out why it was such a threat when he says, let us go down and confound their language. But you're thinking about it. And think about it in a heliocentric Big Bang universe and stuff. And you're looking down on these little peons almost that are building this little tower. In that sense, it just seems so silly in the sense that why would it even be a threat? Why was it a concern? Because clearly it was a concern. Now I can go into the spiritual and say there was other significant markers in there. But it clearly says they were trying to build a tower to the heavens. But interesting, when you read other books like the book of Jasher, it explains that he knew from the account of the flood, from his kids and stuff like that. And you get into Nimrod, you get into the expeditions like to Antarctica and stuff like that. I mean, Operation Nimrod, and you get into Operation High Jump, and you get into Operation Fishbowl. I mean, some of these things are very interesting, biblically speaking, when you start studying the expeditions. I mean, and you kind of find out what Nimrod was about, and you start connecting these whole things, and you're going, wait a minute, is there something a lot bigger that Satan has been doing to really, really, and I believe, destroy the credibility of the Bible by taking out its foundation? And the only way you do that is you take out the foundation right from Genesis. And even if you believe a lot of the stuff, but you don't believe in some of the stuff, to me, I think it's dangerous, because it's like then you're kind of picking and choosing what's literal and what's not. And what I find interesting is a lot of people I talk to that, think maybe some of this stuff is crazy. They're the ones that believe in 6-day literal creationism. And it's like, okay, so that's literal, but this is not. So, these type of things I just think is important when we're talking about the Word of God, when we're talking about the holy inspired, text of the Bible. And to me, it's like, did God, did men just write it, or did God write it through men? And the whole thing with that is, if the Holy Spirit did in fact write it, he would have wrote it for all men for all time. He wouldn't have to write it just for those men at that time because they couldn't comprehend the universe. To me, I think it's a sad argument sometimes when people say, well, you have to understand that they were kind of ignorant. And I'm thinking, all it takes is one verse. And it says, the earth flies through the heavens like an eagle. Even that one verse alone would destroy this entire premise when it comes into geocentrism or heliocentrism. But to me, if you look in the Bible, try to find one verse to support the earth is even moving. And you can't. And I know it seems crazy because we've all been taught the earth is spinning and it's wobbling and it's flying around the sun. But you look in the Bible and all you find, not just one or two verses, you find multiple ones talking about how it's fixed, it's immovable, it's stationary, it's firm. And to me, if you actually think about it, it kind of makes sense the way God would create it. If he made everything for the earth, everything would kind of revolve around it. Everything would be created, just like he said. So to me, I think it's been kind of part of the deception just to kind of distance God. Even for the really hardcore believer, it almost, you have these questions. You're like, well, maybe it's in another dimension, or maybe, and there's things that are muddy. The worst part about it, though, is when we go around because we believe it's scientifically proven. When you research it and you find out, no, it's not. I think that's the most damaging thing. So if people can at least make the distinction, yes, I want to believe in that, but I know it's scientism. I'm good with that. Fine. But don't go around saying this is scientific fact that the earth moves, because there's not one experiment anywhere ever done in the history of the world to ever conclusively prove that the Earth moves. And you can look this up. And it's startling when you look into these things. You'd think by now they would have one experiment just to prove that, yeah, we're spinning or we're flying around the sun, but nothing. Everyone has failed. And when they fail, they go into the theory of relativity, and they start, coming into all new things just to kind of work around it because they don't like the results. And that's kind of what you see with scientism. The minute they don't like the results, they come up with more theories, and they just go further and further down this road.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because, everything you mentioned there, I can't say I disagree with any of it. What I would say from just my journey and looking into all this stuff, I will say that the hostility that came from some of the more recent, the flat Earth movement and all that, I didn't want to have anything to do with that. And so a lot of it had to do with, I just didn't want to get muddied up and jump into that end of the pool, so to speak. Mm-hmm. At the same time, though, the one thing that it did do, and Basil knows this, it did that same thing. I think that it happened to a lot of people when we started looking into the topic, which was questioning, like, wait, what do we really know? What do we really know? Number one. Number two, how much are we willing to believe the Bible? Mm-hmm. And I don't like it when folks use that to try to press the flat Earth into Christians. Mm-hmm. It's a good question. It's a valid question to ask, but I have seen it being used as a sort of a knee on the throat, kind of like, if you don't agree with this, then you're disagreeing with, the Bible. You're basically going against the Word of God. And I just don't think that's number one, a healthy method of communication. But number two, I don't think you're supposed to use the Word as kind of something to either tell someone that they have to believe a certain way about something.
I agree.
But at the same time, they're valid points. And I have looked at this topic, and I can't look at the sky, I can't look at the moon, I can't look at stars the same anymore. Whether it's heliocentric or it's a dome, whatever. I'm looking up in awe, and I'm kind of in a phase where I'm investigating these things, and I haven't shared it publicly too much, but. Because there is that question. You brought up the dimensionalities. You brought up, a couple different things. The concept of a whirlwind, taking Elijah up and things like that. It makes me wonder if there is some sort of dimensional reality to it, where the language used was, the language that could be used at the time. And it's not that it's inaccurate. It's just that it is using the words that they had to describe certain things. If they were extra dimensional properties to it, something like a firmament, which is, when you look at the definition, you look at the word, it's a literal physical, hammered out, hard piece, so it's a physical thing. Now and again, I don't know. I mean, people have concluded, therefore, there is a hard dome, but at the same time, I'm going, well, okay, maybe that's possible. I'm not taking it off the table, but at the same time, if there are whirlwinds that take you up, if there are, Tower of Babel, sure, yeah, they're looking for the cracks in some of the other text and stuff like that. It's fascinating, but again, we don't really know. You know what I mean? Like that's part of the issue. Is that we're all kind of investigating these things, and I love that part of it is that we've come to this point where we really are questioning everything, and I think. That's healthy. I think that we should do that more just in general, just to come to the truth as you were talking about. So I'm glad that you're taking this approach because it feels like, you're kind of keeping it an even keel. You've gone through the rigors of looking at, creation science. I was really into that as well. And I was really into apologetics. And, one of the great arguments for the existence of God is the Kalam cosmological argument, made famous by Dr. William Lane Craig. Mm-hmm. And he basically uses the very scientific, quote unquote, the scientific, narrative of a Big Bang to prove the existence of God using logic, right? So
correct.
Because essentially with the Big Bang, they admitted that there was a beginning to the universe, and that plays right into the hands of in the beginning, the first line of the Bible. So, things like that. So, talk a little bit more about scientism and,
sure.
Because I want to get into sort of the nitty gritty of what is it? Because here's the thing. What I've seen is there's a lot of data that gets collected, and the differences come with the interpretation of the data, and that is predicated on one's presupposition, right? So you got to do like a history of psychology of each individual, looking at what they're looking at, and and sort of assess how they came to the conclusions of what they did. It's kind of messy and challenging. How do you wade through some of that?
Well, I mean, I think it comes down to like really, searching the scriptures and then kind of looking at, for the longest time, I remember even having commentaries, and I'd look in the commentaries in some of these trouble verses, and I mean, there'd just be nothing mentioned because it's like we have no clue almost. It's just like they were just omitted almost. And to me, I was just like, well, that wasn't, sufficient for me. I wanted to really know, where things are going on. I mean, like you were talking about, past stuff, but then again, you bring up a verse like, when Christ comes in the clouds, every eye will see him. I mean, if you try to actually picture that on a round ball, it's tough. You know what I mean? I mean, I guess you'd come up with, different interpretations. When Jesus went up, did he literally go up? Or is just, is it just a construct? I mean, to me, even directional. Most people, like, I don't know if you have any kids or whatever. I've got a little daughter. If she's like, Daddy, where's heaven? Most people will point upwards. Or they'll say, where's hell? And they point down. The question is, where is up and down? Where are directions in space? In the sense that we're, a spinning ball flying through, the heavens kind of thing. So for me, I'm like, even simple directions, when people would look up and they knew that God was up, where is up on a construct? When you actually start talking space and you start talking the heliocentric universe, I mean, everything gets distorted. And for me, I looked at, the fact that like, okay, Satan loves to just, and you look at every verse, and I say to people all the time, I say, try this experiment because it's really profound. Take every verse that you can find with creation and just hypothetically, just take it literal. Now, look at what scientism says about it. It will be the polar opposite. If it says the stars are small or whatever and close, it will say they're billions and trillions of years away. If the Bible literally will say it's only about 6,000 years old, it will say it's 6 billion years old. But again, it gets worse. You get into even the order. You get into the fact that, Earth was created. It had plant life before the sun, moon, and stars were even created. I know it's hard to digest in the sense for some people, the fact that there was light. Light was created even before the luminaries were. But here's an interesting thing. When you get into the Big Bang cosmology that Craig wants to bring up all the time, the only problem with that, though, is you have suns, plural, and there's another problem. If you look at the Bible, it says the sun, the moon, and also stars. Stars are distinctly different. Right from the Word of God, right from Genesis, it says there's one sun, one moon, and also stars. So when they tell us that all the stars we see are suns, that muddies the waters even more. But to get on my point, when it comes to everything they've taught us that there were suns and that universe is spun, around the sun. So everything that we see in our galaxies were created first by suns and then Earth. Well, you read Genesis, you have Earth created before the sun, moon, and stars. So what I'm saying is, I tell people all the time, I say, don't you find it fascinating? You would think that maybe they'd only do a couple, but I find it really fascinating when you just hypothetically say, okay, I'm going to write down all these verses, that they're silly or whatever you think, but I'm going to write them all down, and I'm going to go and look at what scientism has taught me about them. And you are going to find a striking, complete attack, complete polar opposite of what is being presented in the Bible. I mean, yes, we can sit there, and I did for the longest time, giving God the honor and glory over the entire Big Bang, cosmology. The only problem with that, though, is you can't support it scripturally. I mean, I'm not saying that it's even a problem, but what I'm saying, scripturally, you're going to have a very hard time to find one verse to support a heliocentric Big Bang universe, period. It's very tough to do. But for me, I just was fascinated when I started looking at all of these scriptures, and I'm like, unbelievable. I mean, I could do a whole show just on verses to show how they have completely flipped it. They have said that no, there's not one sun, there's millions of suns or billions of suns. Oh no, they're when Jesus, like when you get into eschatology and you get into some language in the Bible like Daniel and stuff like that, it's talked about quite a number of times that the stars are all going to fall to the earth. Well, it's one thing if you want to dismiss some of the prophets and stuff, but how do you dismiss the Messiah, Jesus, talking about all the events that are going to happen in the end times, which everyone takes literal, that people are literally going to run to caves and hide, and and he says all the stars are going to fall to the earth. Well, if we go with what scientism has taught us, that stars are massive, we're going to have a big problem with even one star falling to earth, right? So the question is, could they possibly be lying? I mean, when you start looking it up, you're like, they have no freaking clue. They have never scientifically concluded anything when it comes to anything. I mean, it's actually startling. I thought for sure they actually have some really good formulas. They would have put this whole argument to rest by now. They'd come forward. But all they come forward with is just, silliness. They drop a mic on the stage, or they say, you're dumb. They just call you names. But no one really is credibly coming forward and just conclusively laying it to rest with the scientific method, saying, here's an experiment you can do, and this will conclusively show you whatever you need to see, whether it's the movement of the earth or it gets into the shape of the earth or whatever. So I just find it very startling. And the more that people are looking into this, and the beautiful thing about this is anybody can go out and apply the scientific method and say, okay, if these are all the calculations, here's all the numbers, go prove it. Like the Bible says, prove all things. So I think a lot of people in this investigation are really passionate. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of immaturity. I mean, it's fairly new. And I know when sometimes we get excited. When I first got saved, I mean, I think I was, in the first month, I was telling everyone down the street they were going to hell. I was totally immature as a Christian, right? But I was passionate, right? I was scared for people. And as time went on, I kind of matured and I saw that, no, this isn't right. And these aren't right things to do. So I apologize for the community or even words that are said. Hopefully, as we continue in this journey, we definitely, especially with our brothers in Christ, know that, hey, at the end of the day, this this shouldn't divide us. This definitely shouldn't be, salvational in the sense that we should make it, essential. It's something that's important. But again, to me, I've got a lot of great brothers in Christ right now that are definitely not on the side of what I believe, but we're great brothers in Christ. So I want to emphasize the fact that for me personally, I definitely want to be a strong role model in the sense of saying, hey, man, at the end of the day, everyone has their own journey. And I'll tell you right now, I mean, if I was listening to this broadcast, maybe 5 years ago, I'd be laughing at it. So, we're all somewhere. And I just think that, love is the most important, and speaking truth and love is kind of what I want to do. But I really want to implore people to be like, hey man, just what's it gonna hurt to really, really search these scriptures, but look at scientism. I mean, in Scientism Exposed, I put just a few clips in there. You got Lawrence Krauss sitting there saying, don't thank Jesus for dying. Thank the stars for dying for you. It's the stars you should thank. And if you look at the redemption story of scientism, the stars birthed us. And you get into Aleister Crowley, and everyone's a star, every man and woman is a star, and you start getting into the spiritual deep layers of this that I haven't even touched yet. In part 2, I'm going to go a little deeper, and in part 3, I'm definitely going to go really deep. But when it comes to the very deep, sinister, how this all links together with stars and the stars, and even the fact that they told them they're suns, and you get into like the sun worship. And I'm definitely not saying that anyone that believes in heliocentrism or sun worshipers or anything like that. I just find it fascinating that Ecclesiastes says nothing new happens under the sun. And we have Rome, we've got the Greeks, we've got Egypt with Ra. Sun has always been a very, very prominent thing throughout time. And I find it interesting in our sophisticated technological scientific world, we are still revering. The fact is, even Copernicus went on to say that why are we giving the earth the significance? It's the sun that gives the light. It's the sun that brings life. The sun should have the prominence. And it's always been this push to adore the sun, not the earth. And I just think it's a big shift when all of a sudden the Bible teaches us that it's the earth that's the prominent place. It's special, it's unique, it's different. Why is it that the earth has to be the same shape as everything that we see? I mean, people will sometimes say, well, I mean, you're telling me, and to me, I think it's very interesting to start thinking about it and going, if God's going to create something completely unique, and I know that's unique because there's life and, us and all this, but beyond that, could it be that Satan was really trying to still distort it? I look at it in my research that Darwin was kind of like the fall guy. He was almost like the guy that was definitely everyone zeroed in on, including myself. We all zeroed in on the biological sciences, but no one ever really stopped and started looking at all of the cosmology, like the, astronomy and different areas of science. They all focus on the biology because it affected me. You're telling me I came from an ape? No, I'm created special and unique, from God. So we all took offense. We zeroed in on that. But all I say to people and I encourage them is saying, hey, if that was completely corrupted and it's a big conspiracy, there's a lot of lies and cover-ups going on to keep that whole thing going, could it be that Satan has his hand in other forms of scientism, and in my opinion, are even more dangerous in the whole scheme of things? Because, this is something that's important to me, and I just encourage people to, look at it. But at the end of the day, if all of a sudden you still aren't convinced, hey, man, you're still a brother of Christ with me, and I'm fine with it. I just hope that people will, take it serious and just look into it because, to me, it's something that's worthy of pursuit. Truth does matter. Right.
And, it's interesting you brought up, the stars falling, 1/3 of the stars falling to Earth. And, you go to Acts 14, and it's really interesting because you have the priest of Zeus there. Some translations have priest of Jupiter. And, Barnabas and Paul, they thought Barnabas was Jupiter and Paul was Mercury. Some translations say, Barnabas was Zeus and Paul was Hermes. But this idea that these celestial bodies would appear as men on the ground, kind of interesting when you look at, what you just said and how Lawrence Krauss sitting there saying we come from the stars, the propaganda now that we have to leave Earth, because the Earth, we're just destroying Earth. So we have to get out of here. And, the exoplanets and all the stuff that they're discovering, Can you give us an example? You mentioned a couple times how, the sciences or scientism, they don't offer any kind of conclusive evidence. Can you give us an example of something that, and you mentioned a couple, but dig into more specifically, what the claims are, and then what these scientismists, I guess you can call them, what they preach?
And a lot of them are just really simple. But one that I think a lot of people, when they start looking into it, is they go, okay, well, wait a minute, something's going on. I mean, the Earth is told to be like 25,000 miles in circumference, these type of things. So when you start taking their calculations, not ours or anyone's, really the scientism, they basically throwing all this stuff together on their calculations. The problem, however, though, is when people go out and actually do these experimentations, I mean, they should not be able to see things like 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 miles away. They should be, so much below the curvature of the Earth. Like, we've all been told that, the ships go over the horizon. Well, the problem with that is, now that we have all this technology, the minute that ship disappears, grab your cell phone, zoom right in, and there's the ship. Wait till it disappears again, zoom in some, further. If you have a really high powered, like a P900 camera, I mean, you could keep zooming in on that thing for a long time. There is no, and that's the problem here. It's crazy, but really, when you start conclusively trying to find, measure, do anything through the scientific method, you can't do it. And, it'd be very easy if someone came through and said, hey, here's the experiment, here it is. And, this wouldn't even be a topic. But I find it interesting, after all this time, no one is conclusively just shutting it down. I mean, yes, there's all these theories and formulas and different things like this. But again, when you have pilots coming forward and talking about, well, wait a minute, if they're going to keep, 30,000 at altitude and they never dip their nose. Well, you start looking at the models, and eventually they're going to fly into outer space. If they do not continually keep dipping their nose, and again, if you talk to all the pilots, when the pilots have come forward, and even pilots that I've even talked to, they say, no, we never dip. I mean, we stay with our gyroscopes. We stay at complete altitude constantly. Well, you got a big problem to stay at that altitude around a ball. You're going to fly into outer space. So people are just constructing these things. They're taking the true science, the empirical. They're trying to use as much as they can of this, getting outside of maybe the spiritual nature or the biblical pursuit of this. If you're starting at the scientific inquiry of it, one by one, it's not one or two. I mean, the list is like hundreds of things. I mean, and they're not bringing anything to the table. I mean, they'll just say, well, you're not high enough. You got to be at this altitude. Well, people that are getting to that altitude, I mean, they've sent up, weather balloons with not fisheye lenses or curved lenses, just straight lenses, at 110,000 feet, and it's completely flat, like every which way. You should be able to see massive curvature at that point. People are actually zooming in 100 miles away. Like in New Zealand, there was one guy that zoomed in, and I mean, this stuff should be 1.4 miles below the curvature, and he's seeing it clearly. So there's just things like this that kind of keep coming up. But I think the most profound thing is not really even getting into the shape of the Earth, getting into this movement thing. Because again, we're told, we have the Bible clearly saying over and over and over that we're still stationary, fixed. I mean, there's a million different, there's a lot of different adjectives to support. You have all these verses supporting the movement of the luminaries, the sun, the moon, the wandering stars. I mean, we've called them planets now, but it gets very fascinating if you want to do a really cool research on the 7 wandering stars, or like the wandering stars, like in Enoch and stuff. Very intriguing. It's like these guys went against the order, and they're almost like penalized. They're almost going to be going to like a prison, and it gets into the living nature of stars. Could stars be something completely different than what we're taught? There's a lot of stuff in the Bible to support the fact that there's a living attribute, the living stones of fire. There's different verses in there that kind of support that nature. Maybe, there might be something to that. But at the end of the day, I'll never conclusively say I know 100% exactly the way it works or what it does. But what I'm saying is, when you have guys that are sincerely attacking the Bible, attacking Christ, completely with an agenda to deceive people and to say different things like this, to me, the Bible warns about, the wisdom of the world, people that are going to be set up that are going to basically make people, move away. And I just find that how many people have actually walked away from the Bible because of the ridiculous claims, because it's gone against what scientism has taught. And I mean, you run into these people, including myself, for a long period of time. If it wasn't for God rescuing me, and just, even when I was even looking for him, I mean, there were different seeds in my life that were planted, but really it took kind of a supernatural, wake up, I'm going to use you type of scenario. But for me, this is the type of thing. I was looking at the Bible. I'm like, you can't trust the Bible. I mean, these guys, are ignorant. And that to me is the evolutionary lie, that we come from the Neanderthals, it's okay. They were kind of dumb. And you know what? The Bible's great for, a crutch and to make you feel good. But really, they didn't have a proper understanding of the world. But what I find really brutal about that is, when you start looking into it, you find some incredible technologies that were going on, in ways we're becoming dumber. In my opinion, but I think that part of the lie is they don't want to show exactly how sophisticated and actually how smart, people really were. And we're moving away from that, and we're getting into these foolish notions. And I just think that it's very intriguing when you're dealing with something that basically, Satan has got a lot of, the New Age and world religions, and he's got all these different belief systems. But what is so incredible about scientism, it's not a belief system, it's fact. It's reality. It's science. How do you debate with science? You can't. It's science. I mean, duh. We've already proved this. And, next. So to me, I'm thinking it was so really smart, not just to have another belief system or whatever. It was like, I'm going to masquerade this. I'm going to infiltrate. And it's just like he infiltrates many things. He's infiltrated the church. He's infiltrated different things. He's infiltrated true science. That was a really good pursuit of understanding God's creation. And I believe early on, he knew the importance of infiltrating it so that he could masquerade his, belief, his basically Satanism without the robes. But the whole thing with scientism is, I think it's deadly. So all I'm saying to people, especially in Scientism Exposed, and for people that, follow or listen to what I'm saying the biggest thing is just make sure whatever you believe, and you're going to basically you're going to stand on it. You're going to stand on that mountain. You'll die on that mountain. Just make sure it's true scientific, like it's true science, not scientism. Because if you start looking into it and you're like, oh, wow. Like you said before, it's like, then it's cool. It's like, well, I don't really know. And that's fine. People can say, I really don't know. They're saying this, but I've looked into it. It's not scientific. It's the theory. It's a good theory, maybe. It's just like evolution, the theory of evolution, the theory of gravity, the theory of relativity. All of these things hide under that banner. But when it comes down to, can you apply the scientific method to these things? And interesting, I never looked into it, but when I did, I was like, what? You got to be kidding me. There's no experiment to, gravity for one. It's never been measured. It's never been quantified. It's never been tested. There's nothing to it other than a theory that basically holds everything together. And without that, everything falls apart. But something as simple as that, we just take for granted. And we're like, okay, but has it gone through the scientific method? Is it truly scientific? Is it verifiable? And the answer is no. So if you want to stand on something, it's all good with me. It's great, because at the end of the day, if you're standing on the Bible, that's awesome. And I believe that you can stand on it your whole life. And it's not like you're deceived if you don't come to this truth or anything like that. I don't believe that at all. I believe that everyone's on different paths, and there's different passions, and there's different ministries that God's called different people to. There's certain people that might find this, really a worthy pursuit, going at this or going at that. But at the end of the day, I just think it's very important. And that's why I wanted to get this film out to everyone and make sure that, nothing hindered people from seeing this. And there's been such an incredible response. So many people, opening the Bible. And that's one thing I find very fascinating, is when people uncover some of these lies, they start going to the Bible like I've never seen. I've been in many ministries, and I've never seen so many people coming to the Bible through anything when it comes to any conspiracy than the conspiracy to hide the true creator of creation.
Right. And it's fascinating, too, because we have such I'd say scientific celebrities, people like Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson, who, a lot of times they're kind of they kind of take the same tactics that you were mentioning earlier, where they'll just suddenly kind of burst into ad hominem, or they won't give direct, evidence or experiments to falsify certain things, but they've become sort of celebrities, or kind of how Gon mentioned earlier, they're almost like priests of this scientism. They're just held in such high esteem, and a lot of this comes from charisma, and that they do well on camera, which, if we're being honest, is there's a lot of preachers that get a lot of value from that.
Isn't that striking? No, sorry to interrupt, but isn't that striking if you stop and think about the fact that that's the best the world is giving us, is a Neil deGrasse Tyson and a Bill Nye? Like, I find that very, very, very startling when you actually stop and think about, they're celebrities, and I understand that. But really, if this was like a big conclusive, like, let's put this to rest, let's bring some real heavy-duty scientific minds and lay this to rest. And instead, they bring an actor, and they bring a guy. Like, Bill Nye's not even a scientist. Right. That's conclusive. He was an actor. But I just find that there's something very startling about the fact that these are the two big prominent features. Like, let's call Bill Nye, let's get him on the news, or let's get Neil deGrasse Tyson. And I'm kind of going, wow, like there's something really bizarre to me that really, if the world, this is just so sophisticated and this is so knowledgeable and everyone should know this, why wouldn't you bring like the brightest? If these are the brightest, my goodness. And these guys are really, they've said some disastrous quotes against the Bible. Neil deGrasse Tyson, he basically said God is a bucket of scientific ignorance. The quote in the film is science makes God unnecessary, right? So the question is, if these guys, that was Carl Sagan quote, by the way. So if these guys are setting up quotes like this, saying stuff like, Lawrence Krauss, I think he also went on to say that if you teach your kids creationism, that's child abuse, right? These guys are incredibly against this type of stuff. But to me, it seems like they're just mouthpieces, and they are very anti-biblical, anti-Christian. And I just find, and I think a lot of people are even waking up to that aren't even Christian right now, is they're going, interesting, I know these guys are charlatans, but wow, they're not going after Buddha. They're not going after Muhammad. They're going after Jesus, right? Wait a minute. So I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to seeing the way that Satan's working. And if they're bad and they're going against this, it's like, hey, I better look into Jesus a little bit more. So I've had some amazing conversations with so many different people. And I just know tons of people that really are like, hey, man, this is the first time I've ever opened a Bible in my life through this investigation of so I find that really encouraging. But just to go on that point with Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye, I'm just blown away by really after all this time. And just recently, you got Kyrie Irving coming out, that NBA player, and you got more stuff hitting the news. And it's like, sure enough, they call those two guys. And I'm like, really? These are the scientific, like the masterminds of our time? Like, hopefully that's not written in the history books,
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. And, I'm fascinated by this idea of scientism being like a spirituality, because there's also been this sort of push, and Neil deGrasse Tyson kind of talks about this too. They'll talk about science in sort of like a poetic or spiritual way. And then we also have little pockets here and there, whether it be New Age or whether it be, some type of, infiltration into Christianity or something. Or even, I believe the Dalai Lama said, hey, whatever science says, that's what we're going to believe as Buddhists. And so we see science even infiltrating, pretty well-founded belief systems, much less, Christianity itself.
The Pope just came out. I don't know if you saw that announcement, but he said God did not speak things into existence. He used evolution. And he basically 100%, Pope Francis, just put it out there for the entire, Catholic Church. But I just found that interesting, because I would say, for anyone looking into it that's a believer, if the Pope is endorsing something, for me, it's a red flag. That alone should almost speak volumes, that he was so adamant about basically making almost a mandate saying, no, church, this is what God has done. And I was like, he just linked right with scientism at that point. And I'm like, hey, with my eschatology, now it's really starting to fall into line. But I just thought that was interesting how he went so far as not just to embrace that, which if you kind of look back and you find out where the evolution, it came from a priest and stuff. The whole Big Bang was coined, but what I find is strikingly interesting is he went so far as to say it's absurd to think that God would just speak things into existence. I was like, wow, what a slap, like, I say there's a lot of Christians that would believe that God spoke things into existence. We could debate about a lot of things, but most of us would say he's God, he can speak things into existence. But he doesn't 100% have to use evolution. I know it's a theory out there, but I'm thinking when a pope actually doesn't just leave it open to interpretation, he went so far as to actually tell everyone, no, God did it this way. And I was like, major red flags, that should be a major red flag for a lot of people to look into it even more, because now he's fully embracing scientism and everything it offers, even to the point we were talking about space and aliens. He already is ready to baptize aliens when we find them, when we find out their life, he's all excited to baptize them. And I'm like, and then you got the Catholic Church with the biggest telescopes in the world. Their main telescope is called Lucifer. You can't even write this stuff. You think this is a comedy show, but again, this is for real. Their telescope is called Lucifer. And what are they looking at out there? And the question all becomes, we have all these different theories. But again, what's really interesting is when you all of a sudden try to actually read the Bible without any science, without any worldview whatsoever. It's really tough to do. But if you try your best to do it, it's really intriguing what happens. Because again, you got to remember everyone's worldview is formed by something. We're all guilty of it. It's hard to read the Bible not biased. But if you try to do it, it's very, very intriguing. But what I find interesting is that a lot of people are bringing in a lot of the world's wisdom And I think the red flags are going up more and more when all of a sudden, you start seeing like the Pope embrace things and doing things like this. And then really the whole, we can get into the alien deception thing, because I think all of us would be in agreement that, the alien deception thing, is more demonic than, extraterrestrial. I always tell people it's not extraterrestrials, it's interdimensionals, in the sense that these aren't like beings from other planets that are coming, hovering around. I would say that most Christians would probably hold to a view that, this is deception, that, that God created, but it's not from, 10 light years away that they traveled in a spaceship. It's more of a dimensional type thing. But I just think the entire narrative of space, aliens, contact, great deception, I think all of this stuff is really playing in. Even when we start investigating into stuff, the question is, was our worldview shaped biblically, or was it shaped through scientism? If our worldview was shaped through science, wonderful, great, no problem. But if it was shaped by scientism, you need to look into scientism more, because it is very, very dangerous, deceptive, and I believe that there's a lot more that goes on than a lot of people know.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, my question for you is, where does science belong? Like, what parts of science belong within, the Christian life? What can we trust? What should we be listening to? What is there that, obviously the Bible's not going to say, cell phones are evil. But I mean, where does that fit? What are the limits of science? And, how can Christians interact with it in a way that's not, going to be compromising over the long run?
Well, it's going back to the definition, or getting into the true scientific method, empirical science, something that can be, experimented, repeated, verified. To me, I think this is important. And, you're getting into Romans 1, where it talks about how God made it very easy for people to understand throughout creation. Could it be, though, that there was a plan in place to make it very confusing so that God could kind of be, kind of hidden? I think Satan's attempt was really to try to hide God as much as he could in his paradigm, basically excluding God. So the fact is, they've kind of constructed an entire narrative that God is not needed. I mean, these are their words, not mine, right? They've said, look, right, God's not needed in any of our paradigm. The Big Bang, I mean, he's not even needed for that. So forget even evolution. So what I'm saying is he's tried his best, but the reality is this: Satan, in all his power, or his limited power, the one thing he can't do is he can't distort reality. He can basically teach lies and we can choose to believe them. But what he cannot do is he cannot bend reality. So with the scientific method, you can go out and verify with your senses, with what God has given you. I think that is the key here, is that you could go out and say, God, I'm going to prove all things. You've given this. I'm going to go out and see truly, creation is showing me this. I've been told this. I'm going to go out and I'm going to prove all things through the scientific method. So to me, that there's nothing more worthy of a pursuit than basically looking at the words of the Bible and saying, you know what? I'm going to go out and prove that through the scientific method. That's wonderful. That's awesome. So in the Christian life, for years and years, I always heard, like they'll say the Bible's a science textbook and stuff. The reality is this, though: the Bible's beyond a science textbook or a history textbook. It's the Word of God. So even to label it even as literature, I think there's a danger in that. I think the Bible is full on truth. It's the reality. We judge everything by the Bible. We don't apply anything to interpret the Bible, including even our worldview. We have to read it and we have to say, okay, if this is the case, and it's saying, that we're still, then if the world is telling me that it's spinning, moving, it's flying, it's wobbling, it's doing whatever, there should be something in reality to 100% conclusively prove for all people, if they want to apply the same experiment, to prove it. And to me, that's a way of honoring God. That's a way of God honoring us, saying, see, I am who I say I am. To me, that's the stuff that's been lost. We just listen. Scientists discovered, 8 new exoplanets, and oh, wow, we congratulate them. But who are the scientists? I mean, we hear all these announcements, but no scientists come forward. Who are these people? And then you'll hear like 9 out of 10 scientists. Well, I want to talk to the one that disagreed. What does he have to say? Why doesn't he believe, right? So these are the type of things, but we hear all these things. And again, this gets into other issues with scientism that I'm going to get into in part 2, is getting into even like vaccines or climate change. Because again, the science is settled, they tell us. But it's very intriguing when you find out that there is a lot of very qualified scientists coming forward and saying it's not settled, right? This is not conclusive. There's no proof to show that man is warming the planet or whatever. So to me, I'm like, when they are telling us there's no debate, and they're ridiculing anyone. They're calling us climate change deniers, or they're calling us whatever they want to call us. The fact is, it's fine and dandy, but when you've got a lot of people that are coming forward and saying, well, where's the scientific? Where's the proof on this? Well, no, we have a consensus. We already know in the evolutionary thought that if you come in with a different thought, you're pretty much ostracized. I don't know if you guys ever saw the documentary Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed by
Ben Stein.
Yeah, but again, you can kind of see there's definitely a bias going on. I include a clip in there, especially with his famous, interviewing Dawkins, when Dawkins admits, well, yeah, there could be a creator, but he'd be, evolved through, the evolutionary method. But the startling thing with that was these people were frightened to even come out with some of the data they had pulled together because they knew that their job was over. So a lot of the times this has been an intimidation and fear, and nobody has really stood up on these things. So what I find fascinating is that when you start looking at other areas of scientism, you're seeing this right across the board. You're seeing this with money. Money's the big motivator in different industries and stuff like that. But one by one, you're seeing data changed, moved. And when I'm thinking when it comes to creation, when it comes to a very profound thing, especially how God, illustrated it, to me is one of the most dangerous because, like I said, our entire worldviews, every one of us, we're shaped. And it doesn't matter what religion, doesn't matter what belief system you are, we all come from the same worldview. Whether, you believe in aliens, you don't believe in aliens, or this or that, we all have that construct. They put little mobiles in like baby cribs of the solar system. What I'm saying is, has the solar system been 100% scientifically verified? Or have we just got a bunch of pictures? And what I find startling, and this is one thing that got me, is it's 2017, and we still do not have a video footage of the Earth spinning. It doesn't exist. And furthermore, when you start looking at the Earth, from space, try to find a real photograph of the Earth. NASA admits on every one of the pictures you'll find on Google, it's a rendering, it's CGI, it's a composite, So if you want to put all your faith in NASA, that's fine. You can study what NASA's about, the foundations, Aleister Crowley, the different links that are going on with Jack Parsons. But beyond that, if all of a sudden there's an agency that's basically giving us all our knowledge for the entire universe, because pretty much them and other space agencies, really, do we want to make sure that it's truly scientific, or is it just a bunch of stuff that they're, how are they seeing, 10 light years away or 14 light years away? 1 light year is like 6 trillion miles. Some of these things you got to understand that in our technology, what kind of lens do you have on the camera to see even at 1 trillion miles away? Some of these numbers they float around are absurd, and we have to start going, well, wait a minute, it's 2017. They're being able to zoom in. Why don't they zoom in on the rover on the moon? If they could see that far away, they could clearly, they could zoom in on anything. But the fact is, they're pointing their cameras outwards. They're constantly, desperately looking for life. And I do believe that they are going to make contact. Something's going to happen. My question, I guess, to you guys is, what do you think the church overall is going to do when science and NASA conclusively prove that we've made contact or we found that other life? Will they, reject it and say, well, they've gone too far. Now they're going against the Bible. I reject this. Or are they going to try to put that into the Bible? And I'm just saying, at what point do we actually stop and go, well, wait a minute, when you understand their agenda, when you understand the beginnings of NASA, when you understand all these pursuits, and then you start asking yourself, wait a minute, they're telling us all this. They're saying they have a rover on Pluto and all this kind of stuff. And yet the ISS guys, they basically, I have it in the documentary, they say that hopefully with all of our research and stuff we're compiling here on the ISS, one day we'll be able to go to the moon or Mars or beyond. And my question is, wait a minute, you went there in a piece of cake in the 60s, which if you actually start looking at the Apollo and you start looking at it, the technology, it's actually laughable. But regardless, the fact is, why aren't they there every month? Why aren't they, and my thing is that they're going to kick the can down the road. I do not believe they've ever been to the moon, nor do I believe we will ever see it in our lifetime, nor will our children see it. They will say we're going off further where we can't verify it. But the reality is that technology's caught up to the moon. And I have a very powerful camera. I can zoom in on the moon, unless they go to the dark side of the moon that no one can see. And that would be an interesting thing if they decide to go to the moon, but unfortunately, we're going to the side that no one's ever seen. I find that really interesting too, that no one's ever seen the other side of the moon other than that, pictures from NASA. And that one thing they released, I think it was last year, which honestly looked like plasticine. It looked like clay stop motion animation. It was really ridiculously looking, and people had a laugh about it. But they said, hey, we got to 1 million miles out and got this perfect picture. And but again, all these stories. But the question is it scientifically verifiable? Can you conclusively, through the scientific method, prove these things. So all I'm saying is put stuff in different camps. No matter where you stand on the subject, just classify it and go, well, that's true science. I'm good with that. Everyone's in agreement. But hey, unfortunately, even though I really like this and I believe in this, I got to put it in the scientism and then look into scientism, because if it's just a theory of men, then we're dealing with a whole different situation because we're not applying the scientific method. And again, as a Christian, there is nothing more better than, applying the scientific method to understand God's creation. And science has brought us a lot of wonderful things, don't get me wrong. I believe it's been infiltrated, and I believe that Satan has masqueraded truth and reality inside something that is a very, very dangerous theory, and it leads to a lot of people, losing their faith and also attacking the credibility and the authority of the Bible, which I think is publicly enemy number one for Satan. Is if he can kind of destroy, people doubting the Bible. I mean, what can I believe? I can't believe anything. If there's one error in there, or they couldn't get the creation right, they didn't understand how the cosmos worked. Well, I can't trust nothing they say. So to me, I think that's why it's so important when it comes to Genesis and the foundations. If you rock the foundations, the building will fall. And I believe that that's why this discussion is so important, is because when you start with creation and God completely talking about the mechanics, the order, how things were created, evolution tells us that we came out of the sea. Well, that's interesting. The Bible says the exact opposite. It says the land animals were created beforehand. So what I'm saying is that when you take that, like I said before, apply looking at what the Bible says, literally, and then look what scientism has taught us, and you're going to see it completely flipped. It's like upside down, like Satanism teaches you to write backwards and do everything backwards. It's like they wanted to flip the Bible completely backwards, and whatever it said, let's go the exact opposite. Let's not go similar or kind of close. It was almost like in the rule book or something. It's like, nope, sorry, you're going to have to actually flip it and see if men will actually go so far as to believe some of these things, that they evolved from apes. Some of these things are, and that's the thing I think a lot of people stand on, is the evolutionary lie. But again, the question I get told a lot of times, you're a conspiracy theorist. I'm like, okay, the biggest conspiracy in the Bible obviously was the death of Jesus. I mean, that was a conspiracy to get him crucified. But when you get into like evolution and stuff, most Christians will admit, yeah, there's a conspiracy going on. There's a cover up. There's people trying to hide it. Well, isn't it a bit of not much of a stretch to just imagine that there could be more of a cover up going on with some other, especially where was evolution birthed from? Follow it back. Get into the root. Where did it all begin? And I tell you right now, I, myself included, never really looked into the Big Bang narrative of how suns were formed and all that. And all I know is in their narrative, whether you're going to attribute it to God, just understand that everything in the Bible, you're going to have to actually start working all the order, the mechanics, everything outside of that. Or you could go with, a lot of Christians will say, well, I believe God spoke everything into existence. I don't care how. And that's fine too. He just created everything and you stay with that. And I think that a person can lead a wonderful, productive, God-like, Christ-honoring life by believing that. I just think that some people will say, hey, I am called to actually, I want to go a little deeper on this. And at the end of the day, we're just truly standing on the Word of God. And if that's our biggest fault, that we just stood on the literal, every word of the Word of God, whether people laughed at us or we disagreed, at the end of the day, I truly want to stand on the Word of God, because I just think that it's really important. But I know that some people might not go that far, and like I didn't for years. So for whatever reason, this is, the years that I got into the subject matter, and maybe I'll be on something else, in the future. But for now, it's important, and God definitely wants me to speak on it and just encourage people, saying, do you really believe what I have said? And I say that all the time. On the back of the DVD, it's like, what if there's been an agenda to keep people from the truth of God? What if everything modern day science has taught you about your origins is wrong? Make no mistake, the very foundations of all mankind's knowledge depends on what it's believed to be the truth about the origin of all that exists. So to me, it's just when you start your entire worldview on everything on the origins, the question is, let's go back to the scientism origins and follow it back.
Oh.
Yep.
Did we lose you? Oh, there you are. Okay.
Yep.
And what I find interesting as well is, I guess I pose this question to you, and that is, if we can't trust NASA or we can't trust the established scientific community, if we can't trust what authorities tell us, or people who, the argument would be, look, the scientists went to school for a long time, they do a lot of study, then they have to do this sort of apprenticeship, and then they have to work in a lab for 10 10 years or whatever it is until they're actually able to start studying things. The question at that point is, who can we trust? What can we trust? And I mean, is this sort of a call to sort of ignore anything that we're told as far as science goes? I mean, you mentioned there's some experiments that each individual can go out and do themselves, but I could see an argument coming from the scientific community saying like, well, there's a lot of stuff you can't do. That's why we have laboratories. That's why we have, lasers, and that's why we have whatever they have. That lasers. That's apparently all I think scientists do is play with lasers. I mean, there comes a point where even just the vocation of being a scientist, if we can't believe anything that comes out of the scientific authorities, why do we even have scientists, really? I could see that. I could see that argument coming from some people.
Yeah, and I mean, just like we were talking about expelled and stuff, I mean, I think there's some good people that are really trying to find the truth. But again, the question is when all of a sudden, like in expelled, they completely are off camera or worried for their job or are getting written out of journals and stuff, you can start to see an agenda. You can start to see that they're not asking questions anymore. They have a narrative. As long as it fits the narrative, hey, we're cool with that. But if you bring in any data that goes against this. So I think there's a lot of great, scientists out there. And again, really when it comes down to pursuit of like data to find out, what's true, it's wonderful. But when it comes to like evolution, like I said, a lot of that stuff's been corrupted to the point where, it's almost like a fraternity now. It's almost like you're with the cool crowd. And if you even dare question, it's like, what? What did you just say? It's like, I mean, you just don't dare do it. I mean, you'll just lose your funding. So I think there's a lot of things at play now. But no, I definitely wouldn't say, discount everything, but like prove all things, test it to the word of God. So for me, it's kind of like when everything is going on, it's like we have the full authority. We don't have to go off to like seminary. We have the Bible. We don't have to go off and get a PhD to understand God's creation or how he made it. So to me, the whole argument that, we need all this knowledge or this education or something, I definitely think there's a fallacy there. It's kind of the argument that the Catholic Church says, like, oh, we need to interpret this for you. Mere men can't read this. That's dangerous, right? So to me, it's like, is it dangerous when God would want to verify the fact that the Bible is true, that every single word, every jot and tittle, everything he said, no matter how laughable it seems, like when Jesus said every star is going to fall to the earth, the heavens are going to dissolve, and every star is going to fall to the earth. Well, the fact is Jesus truly saying that, or is it figurative? Is it poetry? Do we now just apply, human construct of like literature and like poetic and allegory and a lot of this, hermeneutics and exegesis and all this stuff have just applied all these man-made kind of ideas around it. But I'm like, this is the word of God, so we can't really do that. We've got to like look at it in context. And I understand there's some things that are poetic, but even with poetic language, for example, when it says like the sun, races out like a bridegroom and joyfully runs his course and stuff, it's still conveying something that the sun is moving. We've been told by scientism the sun doesn't move. Everything revolves around the sun. But you've got multiple verses of the sun moving. I mean, you've got Joshua that's historic, and there's nothing poetic about it. And it says clearly that the sun and the moon stopped. And not only did they stop when they were commanded to stop, they stopped over very precise, specific locations. And I'm thinking, that's interesting. It doesn't just say they stopped. It said they stopped over 2 specific areas. And I'm going, So you start looking up those areas, and there's times when the sun and the moon are out. You start getting into the Bible where it talks about the sun being masculine, the moon being feminine. What I find really intriguing when you start looking into the Hebrew and Greek and stuff, it's very intriguing when you get into the fact that the sun will not give his light, but it talks about the moon. The moon will not give off her light. Well, if the sun is reflecting the sunlight is reflecting off the moon, the verse would be like this. It would say, the moon will not give off his light. But what's really intriguing, another scientific experiment anyone can do, and this is absolutely fascinating, people are finding out that the sun basically gives off warm light and the moon gives off cool light. Now, that's really problematic, and no one's come forward to fully explain that scientifically at all. But what's really intriguing, Rob Skiba and other people, I mean, they've done it themselves. I haven't personally. I know a lot of people that have. You can buy a real cheap kind of, laser thermometer, infrared, and you can kind of go out. But what's really fascinating is when you go out in the sun, you're hot. When you go into the shade, you cool down. Well, the opposite is true with the moon. You go out in the moon and you're cold. When you go into the moon shade, you warm up. And not only that, you warm up to, I think, up to about 12 degrees. So people have done like really conclusive experiments because they're like, well, okay, we got to make sure the conditions are right and it's on this type of material. But I mean, multiple people all over the world have done this experiment. It's fascinating. It'll blow your mind because you'll be out there and sure enough, you'll point the laser thing and instantly you've got up to 12 degrees variance. Why is it that you're warming up in the moon shade, not cooling down? And again, if it is the sun, I mean, try to explain that scientifically. You can't. But yet the Bible says they were two lights. You know, we've always said, I did myself personally. I'm like, yeah, well, God didn't mean two lights. He just meant that, the sun's reflecting off the other one, so they're lights to us. But it goes further than that, and it starts talking about him and her, masculine and feminine. And in the eschatology, in the end times, it says the moon will not give off her light, not his light. The moon is its own light source. I mean, I don't fully understand it. I'm not even going to tell people how to understand it. I'm just going to say the Bible says it. I believe it. Even if the whole world laughs at me and says, oh, you're stupid. We all know it's the sun. Really? Well, why is it getting off a cooling light? If you put food in the moonlight, it has a different property than in the sunlight. So these two lights, and we're finding through science that we've only got to a certain point in true science where we've discovered certain light sources that we can actually do a cooling light now. There's that technology that's out now that basically substantiates the fact that you can actually have a light rather than heat being performed from it. It can actually cool. It's like a blue light. But you can clearly see with, experimentation, this is verifiable. You can do this over and over again. You can have multiple people do it and anybody can do it. So that's the one big thing I find very fascinating with this is we've gone to a point where we feel that the scientists are only those people with the degrees. The reality is that every one of us are scientists. Every one of us can go out and apply the scientific method to whatever we want to conclusively prove something because we have all the formulas. And when we start doing that, when you start doing these experiments and go, whoa, wait a minute, could it be that the Bible's right, that it's its own light? I mean, we discounted that for a long time. But what if the moon, I don't understand how it works, but what if the moon has its own light source? I mean, that blows your mind right away. But then you start reading into the moon, you start doing a study, and you get into Enoch or other areas, you're like, wait a minute, wow, this is really expanding on the fact that this whole time, I just went with the narrative that was the sun, reflecting off of the moon. But now we're dealing with the situation, and there's going to be multiple experiments going even further. This is fascinating. People have even started to do this. Look this up. You take a magnifying glass, and I don't know if when you were a kid, you burnt ants or you burnt paper. I mean, I remember burning paper. It was kind of fun. You could get a real hot day with a magnifying glass, and you could start burning, a hole in the paper. Well, what people are doing is they're finding that they can actually start freezing stuff or making stuff cooler through magnification in the moonlight. So if you take a magnifying glass instead of the sunlight, take it with the moon, and you can actually take those degrees even further if you're magnifying moonlight. So to me, these are things that the scientific community cannot answer. There is I've looked every high and low for any explanation scientifically. They can't. It's kind of almost an embarrassment. And what do? You have this data, and people are doing it all over. And again, with this whole pursuit, there are some very, very high credential people starting to actually look into this. You've got engineers. One of the guys that's in the film, Brian Mullen, that actually is executive producer of Scientism Exposed. I mean, he's licensed in 4 states as an engineer. I mean, coming to this topic, he just started going, wait a minute, I was taught all these physics. I took astronomy. Now he goes, I'm going to start questioning it. I'm going to start applying, on the stuff that I was taught. When he started doing that, he found all sorts of problems. He's come up with some really good series, getting into physics, and he's going to be, talking a lot more about that and getting into some stuff in Scientism Exposed too. But I just find it fascinating that there's people like engineers coming forward. There's people from the military that are dealing with missiles or dealing with, snipers have come forward based on the fact they say, well, we got to take into account the Coriolis effect and we got to take it. And they're coming forward saying, no, we don't. So when it comes to curvature, when they're hitting targets, 100 miles away, with a missile, I mean, again, how are they even seeing these targets? So they're coming forward and they're saying, look, I've seen it myself. We had our, we're seeing these, subjects. And the biggest, I think one of the biggest proofs is water. Water always finds its level. And nobody can find any curved water anywhere. You can't find a real example of it. You can't apply the scientific method to curve water around any ball with any type of spin so I'm just finding it interesting that if we're going to look into certain things and apply the scientific method, just make sure that it truly is scientific and it's all good. But again, if you're really holding all of your beliefs inside scientism, maybe question scientism more and say, could they have an agenda? Could it be maybe satanic? Could it be spiritual of nature? Even if you don't hold to that, just wait a minute. Let's start going and reading between the lines. What are these guys about? What are the guys really are, viciously against? And what I find surprising time and time again is these guys have it out for the Bible. They don't want people even to read the Bible. And you can clearly see that, these guys come off as atheists. They don't believe in God, but you can clearly see the hatred when you start doing your investigation, and you start to see that this is spiritual and there are some big stakes, that are at play for sure.
Yeah.
One question, just because Gons and I actually were talking about this a little while back. One thing that maybe I've just missed it, and that is, what's the explanation for the phases of the moon, if it really is,
I mean, a lot of people will say, with the phases. I mean, I have there's a little toy. It's called Moon in My Room. It's by Uncle Milton or something. Anyways, it's like a nightlight or whatever. But Rob Skiba did a thing on this too as well. But I did a video on this about the moon. And anyways, it just shows the phases of the moon with a light inside. And you kind of look at it and you're watching it and you're like, interesting. The big explanation they have, when it comes to, the eclipses or when they come into these different phases, if you actually start looking into it, if that's an area that you're really intrigued about, I'm telling you right now, the amount of research and the amount of people that have actually started looking into these subjects, and again, I'm not one to talk on it personally, but I know that if it's something that's interesting, it doesn't matter what the topic is. I mean, I would say that almost every question has been tackled 10 times over and then some. And there is some extraordinary stuff. But I was almost hoping in this pursuit that there's stuff come up. There was so much stuff that was like, oh my goodness, yeah, like we can't even touch that. Like there's every one of these things have major holes. It's like evolution. It's like there's a lot of people that believe in evolution, even though that there's a lot of inconsistencies and big holes. And you can choose to believe what you want within that narrative. But it's the same thing. Just because they have told us this is exactly what happens, there's major problems. So when you start applying, your pursuit, looking at, say, cosmology, start to take one area and just look at the other side. And when you start doing it and then look at the Bible, and when it starts supporting more of the Bible, you just got to ask yourself the question, well, that's interesting. I mean, some of the data is now pointing towards this. Like I said, the data is pointing to the fact that the moon is giving off a cool light. I mean, you can look this up and it will blow you away. So that one thing would verify, the Bible on a literal sense. Hypothetically, if you were going to take those verses literal, at least it would verify it through some scientific experiment that we can actually all do. It costs you $20 to buy one of these thermometers, and you can go out on any night. So to me, these are the intriguing things, that it's not like just some PhD or in a lab. We can all do this. I mean, and there's experimentation going on with rainbows. Rainbows cannot be created without a second light source. So it's almost like there needs to be a reflective light source. Well, how does that work, without it being reflected out there? So the question is, could it be reflecting off something? Could there be some sort of firmament? I mean, who knows? At the end of the day, I never conclusively ascribe to any model. I do it more figuratively than anything, but I never once ever say this is conclusively 100% my model. This is how it works. I don't know. And quite honestly, I just marvel and go, Lord, I don't know. And I'm okay with that because you're God and I'm not. I just want to be in awe the rest of my days going, I don't know. But to think that basically they've mapped everything out, they know the weight, circumference, they know the dimensions. I mean, they basically are saying they see things that are 40 billion light years in the past. I mean, that one time when they discovered gravity, it wasn't just 40, trillion miles away. It was 40 trillion years ago in the past that they discovered it. And I'm going, what kind of technology are we talking about when you're seeing stuff in the past? But again, people gobble this stuff up. But every time there's a pursuit getting into some of these things, sure enough, NASA releases a new announcement. And it seems like NASA is releasing an announcement on a weekly basis. And some of this stuff, we just have to stop and going, wait a minute, how do we know for sure? Just a group of people, verified this, is this truly under the scientific method? But for me, if you start looking into any one of these things that you both are discussing, or you're really intrigued with it, that's the wonderful thing about this. It's just asking the questions. I mean, that's the coolest part about the whole thing is, wow, I never thought in a million years I'd be questioning gravity, or I'd be questioning the moon. Like, could it be that, it's not the sun reflecting, like it's its own light source, that God actually created it unique, and that I can take these verses literal? So I just tell people, it's like, you choose, and even as an experiment, try it, try to say, okay, well, if I was going to take all these verses literal, what would happen? Could I use the scientific method to conclusively prove if I took this literal verse? And like I said, just the moon example, as far as the cooling light instead of the warming light, to me, verifies a bunch of verses, not to mention when you start getting into, different areas where, it talks about the luminaries, talks about how the moon works. And I mean, Enoch goes into great detail how the moon works as far as the phases. I know Zen Garcia has done a few really good books on getting into even Enoch. He's got into a few things. And there's some really deep research going on. So it's not just biblical. It's not just conspiratorial. It's also scientific. I find this fascinating, this topic, because you can hit it from three angles. You can go right from the Bible. You can go right from, conspiracy type, hey, let's look into, what's going on here. Or you could go, you know what? I don't even care about either of those. I care about what's scientifically proven as fact through the scientific method. And people are, as we're talking right now, I'm sure someone's doing an experiment, a laser experiment over, water somewhere. And they're finding that, wait a minute, I shouldn't be able to see that thing. And there it is. I mean, how do you, how can that be supported? The only thing that I can say is maybe, it's 18 times bigger than what they've told us. They're wrong on all their figures. Or that we have a different shape going on. But the only problem is NASA's given us all those pictures of those perfect spherical, planets or the Earth. And then you got Neil deGrasse Tyson and other scientists coming forward saying, no, it's an oblate spheroid. It's actually bulges, right? At the equator, significantly so. So who's telling the truth there? So are those guys out to lunch, the great spokespeople of scientism? Or is NASA, taking these photos? Somebody is not being consistent in their story. So, but the question is, could they both be wrong? Could they both have gone, oh, well, this didn't work out. Now we're, everyone talks about the contradictions in the Bible, which, there's no errors in the Bible, and everyone wants to point in the Bible. Well, what about the contradictions in scientism? And if you start looking into it, they're fumbling over different things left, right, and center. They're not in agreement with certain things, and they're getting kind of caught in their lies. And I believe that, everything, will be uncovered. Everything will come to light. And I just believe, I don't know why this time, I just believe that this is an important time that certain things outside of even the biological scientists, are coming to light. And it's just, like I said, it's amazing for me to see so many people coming to Jesus, coming to the Bible through the topic of looking into NASA or, wow, they could have lied. And I've talked to so many people that are like, for the first time in my life, I was an atheist my whole life. There's a God, there's a creator. I mean, it's like that first step. But again, like almost everyone in these circles, they're opening up that Bible and they're reading it because they're like, whoa, because they're already convinced they've lied. Now they're hungry for the truth. And I've been in a lot of different ministries, but I've never seen so many people hungry for the Bible, studying it. I mean, I talked to many different people, and the stories I'm hearing, even after Scientism Exposed, like unbelievable testimonies. And I mean, I know Rob Skiba's got a whole page dedicated to it. I mean, we probably couldn't keep up with how many emails we're getting of people that are just completely surrendering their life and going, wow, I was so deceived. And, where do I start in the Bible? So I've just never seen so many people run to the Bible when all of a sudden they've discovered their entire worldview, was a lie. And it could start easy as like evolution, or it could, but again, I really do believe for a lot of people listening or yourselves, really look into NASA, because if NASA have really lied to us on some big scale things, and the moon, there's nothing bigger than the moon, because if you're going to lie about the moon, I think we could all be in agreement that they'd lie about a whole lot else, right? And again, because I mean, if people are going to believe that. So to me, it's like, really look into that, because the question is, why in the world would they go to all that trouble? And where have they gone? And how far can they go if they can't even get to the moon? And they're trying to say they're in Pluto and they're sending back pictures from Mars, which, I mean, what kind of Wi-Fi connection do they have to transmit pictures back, 100 million miles away? I mean, some of these distances are absurd. And we have a hard time right now, Skype maybe cutting out, or our cell phone, if we drive out into the country, I mean, we lose connection. And they're going to tell us that, they're sending pictures back from Mars from their rover. So I think a lot of this stuff, it could be, science fiction. I think that if you start looking at the beginnings of NASA, when sci-fi even started being created, when you start getting into the media narrative, you start trying to really piece this all together going, whoa, could it be this big? And I think that's just the biggest question that people need to ask. And it's sometimes really tough. Could it be this big? And surprisingly for me, it was like, wow, like this is big. I mean, and all these other conspiracies, 9/11, chemtrails, GMO, whatever you wanted to talk, they all fit inside this construct, which I find very fascinating. It's almost like, to me, I look at it as like the grandfather lie almost, where all this stuff exists, but everything starts connecting and you're like, whoa, wait a minute. I was looking at things in the conspiracy side of things for this angle, But then when you start looking at the entire narrative of like, it was really important to, bring in a whole scientific worldview, to bring in maybe the alien deception, to, these are just ideas. I never, ever go on the record and say, this is the Great Deception. But what I do say, could it be that having a scientism worldview will be you'll easily be able to digest the Great Deception easier. And I'm talking for people. So I never ever say that scientism is the Great Deception, or people will be deceived if they believe in the Big Bang heliocentric universe. But what I'm saying is it affects all men. And could it be that it will be easier to believe the lie if you've already got that construct? So to me, I'm looking into this further. I'm looking into my research, but I do believe that a lot of this stuff has been really programmed because Satan's not just trying to destroy the credibility of the Bible. He's also trying to bring upon the eschatology, the end times, for the narrative, with the Antichrist. And the question is, how is the Antichrist going to appear? How is the narrative going to be, when all of a sudden, you got the Watchers and all these different scenarios. But to me, we have moved into a technological, scientific worldview. No one can debate that. So the question is, will they appear to us not as gods or as entities or as intelligent beings from other planets? And I think when you have scientists, NASA, and all these guys all talking about, there's other beings and life, we're going to discover life. The question is, what's going to happen once life is discovered, or what are they trying to prepare mankind for? The alien deception. And I still hold that aliens are going to play a big part in my eschatology in the end times. I believe that it will be put in there, but I don't look at it like it will be bad. It will be like they've watched us for a long time. They're our creators. Maybe they're the ones that planted the DNA into the monkey, but transpermia type stuff. But I believe that they will be the watchers, the ones that have been watching us. They're our creators. They've loved us from day one. Don't worry, we're here. We've been watching you. We're going to help you. But hey, we got to let you know on one thing though. There's a really evil entity out there, called Yahweh, the Borg, and it's awful. Don't worry, we're not going to leave your side. We're not going to, we're going to help you fight. Because it clearly says in the Bible that when he's seen in the sky, they try to basically, make war with him. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, you got to have a lot of hate in your heart. I mean, what kind of, ideology is that? But I'm thinking that we were constantly warned of a threat coming from outside, and we had helpers to help us fight this great fight. We would easily band together and try to blow this, God out of the sky in the sense. So I've always thought, just with media, with all my investigation, that aliens or the whole deception plays a big part in this deception. And when you start getting into these sophisticated scientists, like I'm not going to say Neil deGrasse Tyson or Bill Nye, but when you get into Carl Sagan, or when you get into these guys, Dawkins is admitting it's not even a likelihood. It's an absolute certainty that there's trillions of life forms, and that we will, at whatever point, discover them. They come through evolution. And quite honestly, I believe that it's going to fill in all these missing links in the scientism story that they can't fill right now, because these guys will come and fill in the blanks for them. They'll say, no, it's okay. I think we knew you were confused, but we were the ones that, planted you or whatever. But I just think that these guys are the fallen ones. These guys aren't good. They will be friends to humanity, and I think they will prepare us for the coming battle, and it won't be good all around.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a kind of a outlook that I think a lot of us looking at the alien deception thing has come to, is that, the Watchers will appear as sort of the helper aliens, so to speak, and they're going to talk about this evil alien that's coming, and that'll be the return of Christ, and everything's flipped. But just touching real quick on the moon thing that you were talking about, I'm reminded, ironically, of a document that I ran into when I was doing research for Age of Deceit 2 and looking at alchemical documents and, ancient alchemy methods and stuff like that. And one document I found, and I didn't really mention it or talk about it in the film, but I may have mentioned it in a past Canary Cry Radio episode. I don't know, Basil might remember, but basically, as part of the procedure to, change base metals into gold, one of the things that, is recommended on this particular list or a step-by-step list here is to take dew that has only that like morning dew that has been, that you have to collect, and then it has to come from moonlight, which for some reason it just reminded me of that, which I thought was interesting. But maybe these ancients and these alchemists and stuff, there's no proof that they really had it figured out, but they had some principles that were, a little bit more in tune with what's really going on. And perhaps, they were onto something in a different way. Now, the other part of it that I find interesting is that most everything with either going really small, going into the quantum realms, and, scientists aren't, they're still not exactly sure what's going on at the quantum level. Obviously, you have CERN and they're doing stuff, but it's very, it's unclear. The scientists aren't quite sure. That's why, the spooky action, there's all kinds of terminology there to try to explain the strange phenomena at the quantum level. The thing is that they say that, if you expand it out into space, or this model that we've been taught, there is a big problem because there's no consensus, right? And that, there's the characteristics or the principles that we can see through the quantum sciences don't align with the sort of cosmological, larger scale stuff. And so there's a inconsistency. They're trying to find the answer, the equation that solves everything. And I've heard people, and this is a question for you, Robbie, that, maybe you've looked at this, maybe some have or some haven't, but the electric universe model is pretty interesting to me because I feel that a lot of creation is sort of electrical in a sense. Not, maybe not the electric universe model per se, because they're also predicated on a heliocentric model, which again, I'm not entirely dismissing. I'm just saying, that's what it is. Have you seen or heard anybody take the principles of an electric universe and see if it fits into the biblical cosmology?
I know that I don't know so much about the biblical cosmology, but I know that there's a lot of research, like with geocentrism and different things like this, getting into that. And there's some incredible, fascinating stuff. I would say that Bob Nodell from Globebusters, which is a show on YouTube, he's done extensive research in that. And there's a few other ones that have really, really dug in really deep into a lot of things. And I would say there's a lot of stuff that's pointing that direction in electromagnetism, getting into these type of ideas. But again, I don't know of anyone that's really researched much on the biblical cosmology side of things with that. But again, like I said, right now, everyone's really just researching, looking into a lot of things. The one thing that we can all agree on with a lot of research, that's the one thing that kind of binds us, I guess, together, is the fact that we severely doubt that we are, basically the truth is what we've been told. And again, a lot of that stuff, the spiritual agenda, different things like this, everything is starting to map together for us. But really, when it comes down to it, do we believe that we're on a spinning ball flying through space at the speeds and all these things that they tell us? No. And again, a lot of that stuff, like I said, came through three different areas. I mean, you've got a lot of Bible people tackling this right now. You've got a lot of truthers, digging in and finding all these kind of, connecting all these dots. But then you've got a lot of really hardcore, scientific minds that are coming forward and trying to perform the best scientific experiments they possibly can, based on experiments that were actually done throughout history. You get in the Bedford level experiment, and you get into Michelson Morley, and you get into some really, really good scientific experiments that were done that people can kind of look at and make sure that they conclusively can try to do this. But that's what's so fascinating about this is, at the end of the day, all these things, are starting to point, and all the things that they're pointing at are all going against scientism. So for me, anything that actually highlights and draws people to the Bible, I mean, obviously I'm going to hold to that. So for example, for me, I do, I'm an enclosed creationist. That's what I go by. That's kind of my title that I kind of coined a couple of years ago. But for me, we are kind of an enclosed cosmology. I mean, with the flood, with different things. I would even say with the time continuum, God being outside of time, he would actually have to create a linear time space in an enclosed type scenario. So whether you come from a heliocentric, geocentric, whatever, we all have to agree from a biblical point of view that we're in an enclosed cosmology to some degree, because you can't have time exist. God's outside of time. He created time, so it's linear for him. He sees the past, present, and future happening simultaneously, right? Which is profound in the sense that God created time. Right? And these are things that go really levels deep. But I think when it comes down to it, could it be that CERN and other places, could it be that a lot of these accounts are people trying to crack it? Could it be that NASA sending, when you get into, Operation Fishbowl, right after the Antarctica expeditions, they create like NASA, and they basically send up, 110 rockets, Russia and the US, blasting at the top of, in the high level atmospheres, And you can kind of see, you can pull this stuff up on YouTube, and you're kind of like, why are they sending these rockets up? And it's almost like, were they trying to trying to see if they could crack it, see what the stuff was? Because it was like they went to the outer edge. And the whole Antarctica thing, I think for anyone listening to this broadcast, if you really want to dig into some really cool stuff, man, get into Antarctica, man, because it is so profound when you get into what's going on there. And it starts to really piece together the fact that, here's one place in the whole world that, like 100, I forget how many, 40 countries put together a peace treaty. It's the longest standing peace treaty ever in the history of the world. We know this world, no one keeps peace treaties for very long but this thing basically says that no civilian, no business, nobody could ever go to Antarctica without, express permission. So, if you want to go to Antarctica, we want to plan a trip. It's going to cost us an arm and a leg, but we can go down. They'll show you the interior, and that's it. But if you say, hey, I want to go venture off, no, you're not allowed to. Nobody is allowed to drill there. And you got Admiral Byrd saying that when he went there with his expeditions, he said there was more uranium and coal and gold. And he said there was resources for the world 10 times over. And yet you would think every country would have been dividing it up. But no, you know what happens? They all agree no one's going to ever own it. No one's ever, it's going to be there for experimentation and the military. They all agree that we're just going to, patrol it, not allow anyone to go there. So I'd say one of the big mysteries that got me going on this was Antarctica. And when you start kind of getting into the, the model of what they've told us, what's really going on there? And then it just starts to get really interesting that once they conclusively lock that down, they start going up. And when they go up, they start blasting all these rockets up in the, and you go in Russia and U.S. doing it simultaneously, 110. And these are big. I mean, these are big, not big warheads, but they're not nuclear or anything. But I mean, these are megaton bombs. They're exploding, way up there. And you can see this. You can see this on YouTube. You kind of, what are they doing? But the actual thing was called Operation Fishbowl. I mean, I can't even make this stuff up, and you're going, that's interesting. So Operation High Jump was at Antarctica. And then you got Operation Fishbowl. But before those two expeditions, the first one to Antarctica was Operation Nimrod. And you're going, wait a minute. You know anything about Nimrod? He's not really a savory character. He's not very good, right? And you're like, that's interesting. They would name an expedition Nimrod. So when you start connecting these from a biblical point of view, and you're going, okay, wait a minute. We know that man's attempt will always be the kingdoms, are going to set themselves up before God. Satan's attempt was to rise above the stars. His pursuit has always been, and you start getting into this, you're like, wait a minute. Could it be that he was trying to do these type of things and put these other things all together? And it just gets very intriguing. So anyone that really wants to search the truth and really likes a good rabbit hole, this one, I really think from a biblical point of view, starts to map a lot of things. You get into the dates, you get into even the numbers about how fast, the tilt, you get into the numbers, how fast we're spinning and stuff. And you get at 666. I mean, it's weird. The numbers start popping up everywhere. And I mean, you could look at this and go try to debunk it. But you're like, the numbers are what they say they are. This is what they're telling us. And they really like these 666 numbers. It's really bizarre how many times you'll see that come up in their miles and how fast it's going around the sun. But really, even from the tilt of the axis, you get the 23.4. But if you take that from 90 degree, you get 666 from the other axis. And it's just, wait a minute, this is bizarre. All these numbers are kind of floating around with all these numbers. But Antarctica, like I said, follow the timeline. There's a great new video that ODD just put up, which is really encouraging because ODD's been a truther for a long time. And just recently, through all this investigation, I mean, he was on an interview, with Rob Skiba and with another one recently. And he said, I'm super close to giving my life to Jesus. He goes, I'll tell you one thing. He goes, I thought religion, I thought this was crap. I've been a truther for a long time. I was a zeitgeist. He was big on the whole zeitgeist thing. But he basically said recently he's at a point now where he's just I have totally come, 100% around. I am, 100% creationist. And he went on the record saying, I'm close to just surrendering, to Jesus, the true creator of creation. And I was just like, whoa. So when you start seeing stuff like this and this whole pursuit and people really looking into this subject matter, that's one thing, it's hard. You hear, that this stuff is just a waste or it's a conspiracy or it's a psyop. And I'm telling you, man, for people and the numbers of people that are coming to the Bible through this, I don't know of anything that would have evil intent. Anything that has an evil intent will draw people further away from the Bible. And unfortunately, with much of scientism, if you start to really systematically look and say, what has the Big Bang heliocentric created, from a general point of view, it's created a very atheistic worldview in the sense that God's not needed. And I'm thinking, would God actually create something where he could be completely almost erased from? Or could it be that the construct was to divert it from the real truth? And so I just encourage people really start looking into creation because again, it starts right in Genesis. It's the foundation of all things. And right from Romans, it says, I have made it clear to understand the true creator of creation clearly by looking. Use your senses, use what God's given you, use, common sense. You don't need to have sophisticated degrees. This whole lie, I think it's the whole evolutionary lie that we need to, have PhDs to truly understand God's creation. And quite honestly, there's nothing wrong with going down that road. But honestly, God would basically make it so that we could totally marvel and be in awe completely of what he said. And I go so far as to say, isn't it even more awe-inspiring when it's like it is 100% polar opposite into what the whole world has taught us? To me, it's like that leap of faith where it's like, are we willing to completely stand to that degree? I don't think that God would hold anyone guilty if they don't. But what I'm saying is sometimes it's just like he's looking for certain individuals to say, you know what? I'm just going to do it and see where it goes. And again, that's been my pursuit. I just said, you know what? I'm going to do this. And Lord, you know what? Yeah, if I'm wrong, Holy Spirit convicts me. I don't want to do anything that would be jeopardizing or something that's unbiblical. Let me just stand by your word. Teach me, Holy Spirit. Teach me the truth of the Bible and help me not to look at the Bible with any type of preconceived notion or anything. And honestly, it's just been an incredible journey. I mean, I've had an amazing walk with the Lord for over 20 years. But I'd say in the last 2 years, it was almost like coming to Christ again. And it was just like, when I came into all of this, my relationship with the Lord has just got closer. I've just been able to look up at the world and go, wow. And for me, just looking up and going, you're literally like Isaiah 40:22. You look down as we're like grasshoppers, and I stretched out a tent. And when you get into this, like these words, yes, you could go allegory, but the question is, what if it's literal? What if he was trying to paint a picture that any man of any century would understand? Whether, it was BC, 80, it was 2017, that all men, the Holy Spirit would inspire it for all men to clearly understand that they could construct this. And I use this argument most recently as a child. Why would he want to deceive a child when they would read it clearly and construct an entire worldview that would basically give honor and glory and almost the simplicity of going, wow, God, you're right above me. And yeah, hell is right below me. And, these type of things that, so again, when it comes to the shape, when it comes to the mechanics, I never, ever say I know 100%. I don't. And I'm okay with that. Lord, I don't even know how the moon works. I don't know how the phases work. I find it fascinating, the research that's going on with these topics, but I just go, you know what? Your word says this, I'm going to believe it. And honestly, it's just been an amazing, amazing journey. So I just like to encourage everyone just to look into it, and whether you come this direction or you don't, it's all good, man. The most important thing is honestly, is that you just like live your life for Christ, understand that he basically paid that price, and that, you know what, God loves you, man, and that Jesus provided that way. And to me, that's the most important thing. So really, if anything, that is for all of my ministry, for Celebrate Truth on YouTube, all the documentaries I do, that will be the thing that basically pushes me forward, because it's the most important truth, and that's found in one person, Jesus.
Well, no matter what we believe as far as the shape of the earth, or the scientists around the world, or NASA, or anything like that, I think everybody can agree with your ending statement there.
Yeah, and I want to hold to that, because like I said, I know that like sometimes, and even through the time that I've been a Christian, you put two Christians in a room long enough, we're going to argue about something, right? But at the end of the day, we got to decide, like, are these essential doctrines, or are these kind of tertiary? And while I would say this is really important, and I would implore someone, just like someone would implore me to look into something they believe is really important. But at the end of the day, you know what? It's one of those things where, people can kind of agree to disagree. We can kind of encourage one another. We can sharpen each other by bringing other stuff to the table. And as long as, we actually will look into these things, give these things a chance, I just think that that's the most important thing. So even for me included, I never want to be at a point where I say, oh, yeah, I 100% know what I know. And, there's no, I would even say I'm 100% on this, because, again, there always could be something that surprises me. I'm constantly surprised in my journey. But for me, obviously, I always leave that little bit open, that God can teach me something new, that something else can come up. And that, honestly, I just want to be a real good representative for him, and understand that there's, this is a really big deal. Because for me, it really comes down to not the shape or the mechanics of the universe. It comes down to the Word of God. And it comes down to really, are there areas even in the Bible where it's like, maybe I looked at it was cultural or this or that? Like, really, like, I want to actually look at the Bible again and look at areas where it's like, you know what? you said it, I believe it. And I want to have that childlike faith where it's just like, you know what, even if the whole world laughs at me, I just find it really encouraging how, like I mentioned to you before, there's 3 different vantage points of this. There's science that's coming, that's validating this. There's the whole connecting the dots that's really validating this. And then you've got the whole biblical verses. And I mean, you got a lot. We don't have like 2 or 3. And I remember one person was at a church and they said, the one thing we have to address is the fact that you've got like, 100 verses, but for our heliocentric Big Bang, cosmology, we don't have anything. So they said, even though we can stand on this, that's still something that we have to address, because we have to seriously address these verses. And if we want to discount a few of them as being poetic or allegory, what do we do with these other verses? So as long as people just look into it, and if you come to your conclusion, that's great. I've told people that even when it comes to Jesus, look into it, seriously look into it. Is he who he said he is? But no, don't. I mean, life's too short for you not just to discount it. I mean, look into these things. So to me, it's like, look in and just see. And if you come to the conclusion, you've basically got that whole verse nailed and you're like, this is where it's at and I believe it and it's staying consistent, great. But a lot of times people just kind of dismiss these things. And I think one by one, if you start really looking into these scriptures, like, what do we do with that scripture? What do we do when every eye is going to see Christ when he comes in the clouds? I mean, how is that even possible on a ball? So to me, it's like, at least have a way to explain that really kind of completes everything. And that's cool. But a lot of times people will just either brush it off and say, well, maybe that's not literal. Maybe that's the fact that, it will be on television, or something. And I'm like, no, you read these verses and different things like that. So it's almost like going through the Bible again and going, okay, well, I don't know if I take this literal, but you know what? I never took this verse literal. I'm going to take that literal now because, I see evidence of it other places in the Bible. And I mean, the Holy Spirit inspired this and he's saying this over and over and over for a reason. And I think a really good place to start, I'll recommend this for a lot of people listening, but it's a documentary called The Principle. I think it's profound, and so many people have found that incredibly, insightful, because it supports the science is going 2 ways. The scientific, and these are scientists that are all interviewed. There's no Christian scientists in there. I mean, you've got like some pretty big names that are in The Principle, and they all show that, wait a minute, it could be the other way around, that gravity is being formed by the entire universe spinning around the Earth, that it basically creates the gravity. So the question is, these guys are coming up with scientific ideas, and they're saying, wait a minute, the data is pointing to geocentric and heliocentric. But my question is, if it also points to the geocentric, what makes the most sense for God to do? If you actually just tear everything apart and saying, okay, if I read the Bible, what makes the most sense for God to show that he is God and he is creator? Does the heliocentric make more sense, or the geocentric? Because The Principle will show a lot of people that the scientific data is now starting to support a geocentric universe, and you can still keep your construct of a globe and the whole heliocentric model, but it will blow you away when you see the scientific data that's coming forward to support the fact that the Earth doesn't move. It's the sun, moon, and the universe that is spinning around us, and they even have formulas that are there that are very profound that support the fact that gravity is being created through the spin. But the one thing that I can agree with that documentary is the fact that they have conclusively shown a lot of scientific data to support the fact that we ain't spinning, we ain't moving, we are stationary, we are at the center of the universe, and everything is revolving around us. And I just read the Bible, and it's just like over and over and over, it's echoing to me that that's exactly the way God created it. So I just find it fascinating. Start wherever anyone wants to start. But again, there's a lot of great stuff. Maybe even geocentrism will be a good starting point to start looking into it, because I think you're going to find some fascinating stuff. And a lot of people that have been real big skepticals, I've given them that documentary, and they were just like, whoa, brother, that was profound. Like, it's got me really thinking about, what do we know with cosmology? I mean, what things truly are scientifically proven, or could it be starting to go the other way? And I just think that that's the real fascinating thing here, is because there's so many things to look at, and everyone asking these questions, I mean, they will, everyone that seeks, will find. And I mean, the truth will be revealed in all things. I mean, and that's the wonderful thing about this, is if someone really has that hunger to really look into it and try their best, just to go, I'm just going to read, ask the Holy Spirit to interpret the Bible, not man, not an agency, regardless what the world has shown us. Let's let the Holy Spirit, convict us, teach us, tell us, what to believe. And I think that's going to be the interesting journey. And that's what a lot of people have found in this, is when they just, for the first time, say, you know what, I'm going to just try this and see. And that's what I'll encourage people to just try it. What do you got to lose? There's nothing to lose and everything to gain, because I'm sure you'll come across some great scriptures, or God will communicate, in a wonderful way and maybe a new direction, And yeah, it's been an incredible journey. So I really appreciate the time and the questions, and it's great to be on the show. I've been a huge fan, like I mentioned before. I mean, Age of Deceit was a huge pivotal point, but just following your work throughout the years. So, like I said, you were even Gon's inspiration in just starting creating documentaries. Just because I remember at one point, never know when, but it was works like yours that really started to get me to a point where I wanted to do something like that someday, whether it was on eschatology or it was on media or it was on, Hollywood or whatever, anything on these things. It's just, I knew that I was called to be, touching on these topics. For me, it was more in my circles and speaking on it. But like I said, it took this topic to basically God to say, okay, it's time, and create the channel. And I've had Celebrate Truth on YouTube for about a year and a half, and just surpassed the 3 million views mark for total marks, and almost at 30,000 subscribers. So I want to thank everyone that supported me. And if you're not a subscriber, subscribe. And if you have questions, reach out to me, and you can find me on Facebook if you want to add me there. Just Robbie Davidson, pretty easy to find. So, and then you can go to my website, celebratetruth.org, if you want to buy the DVD. So I made sure that I released it on YouTube and DVD the same day, so that nothing would hinder people from watching it. So watch it for free on YouTube. And if you want to support or you want a copy to give to someone, people are using it very creative ways. They're getting it into libraries and handing it out to people that maybe wouldn't go to YouTube and watch a 2-hour, movie or whatever. It might be a great opportunity. But yeah, you can go to YouTube, Celebrate Truth, or celebratetruth.org. That's my website. So I want to thank you guys again. It's been a real pleasure and honor being here.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on, and appreciate you, doing what the Lord seems to be leading you to do. And I think, I think all of us, we can get into this and it'll edify somebody, And I just wanted to finish up with a couple scriptures, actually, that I'm sure you guys have, the people in the researching the flat earth. And I really like the 3-pronged approach. I've always actually looked at it from 2, but you add that conspiracy angle, which makes sense. Looking at this topic from scripture, looking at it through science, and then obviously the conspiracy sort of ties into that. The thing that really jumped out at me is this whole idea of the heavens opening. And during Jesus's baptism, that's recorded in Mark, I think there's another time in Mark that the heavens opened, but also in Luke, right during the baptism, it talks about the heavens were opened, right? And the Spirit of God descends, things like that. And it just makes me think, like, okay, what's really going on there? And the fact that, some of the things that I've learned about baptism, through some of the studies of the ancient Near East and things like that, is that baptism was actually a gesture to show that, hey, you're going under, right? As kind of going into the underworld and coming back up as sort of a resurrection type of thing. And so for Jesus to do that symbolically is one thing. And then, to have the heavens open up at the same time, I don't know. It seems to point again, always to Jesus being the ultimate authority here. And I think, I'm in total agreement with your perspective on, the sort of the bigger purpose of why talk about these issues, why look into it, why investigate, why ask the questions, because the people that have come to hard conclusions, I would say that they're no better than some of the scientists who have come to their conclusions, right? They're sort of holding on to these pillars. And, I think we just have to be more open to the possibility that, hey, we don't know, and we can do our experiments to learn about it. And there are even arguments for, the standard, what people are taught with the heliocentric and the spherical model. I didn't want to bring it up in this conversation, but I've seen videos of people proving, not just, proving the curvature of the earth, not through any kind of crazy thing, just basic stuff that people, the same kind of experience that people have used to show the earth is flat, they use to show that there's the curvature. But in any case, again, this stuff is fluid. It's always an investigation. But I appreciate your approach to this, and I'm glad we had you on and you're able to share your thoughts and your research and things like that, because like you said, there are things that I don't think any of us are ever going to agree with, but one day we're all going to be able to sit and agree with the Lord and say, okay, God, you had it figured out, and we'll all kind of, probably mess with each other on who was right on what, what topics or whatever, and we can all have fun. But in the meantime, we're kind of in this, we see through the glass darkly. Again, I really appreciate your approach to this. I appreciate that you're open to it. I appreciate that you're willing to ask the questions, but also not close off to, the possibilities of the whole scope of possibilities of what might be going on. So,
correct.
Yeah. Basil, anything else? Any last word? Or Robbie, did you want to?
No.
Yeah. Basil? Well, Robbie Davidson, thanks so much for coming on the show, buddy. We really appreciate it. And all you listeners out there, go check out his stuff. He's on YouTube. And give one more time, give the YouTube channel name and your website.
Yeah, YouTube, just youtube.com/celebrate truth. So just the two words, celebrate truth. And also the website is celebratetruth.org. And we just have the DVD up there. But like I mentioned, anybody can watch Scientism Exposed for free on YouTube. And like I said, if you want a copy of the DVD, happy to get one out to you. And we've got ones for bulk if you want to give them out to multiple people. But I think it's a really good tool, as far as even in the bigger scheme of things, because we didn't really get too much into evolution and stuff, but it doesn't just touch on these topics. It really doesn't conclusively touch on anything. But what it does is it points to the fact that could there possibly be more that's going on that meets the eye? Could it be that, there is an agenda in place? And really, rather than telling people what to believe, it just says, hey, and if one thing sparks someone where it's going to draw them closer to the Bible or draw them close to the Creator, to me, that's really, really important. And that's what I wanted for Scientism Exposed, is I wanted something that really would take a person on a journey, and whether they kind of, for the first time, saw that there were lies in evolution, because I would say for the first 20 minutes, it focuses mostly on evolution, and then it gets into the Big Bang and stuff. But really, it just asks these questions. And I think that people that check out Scientism Exposed, they really will be taken on a journey like they've never been taken on before. But understand that there's nothing in there that's saying conclusively what to believe, or you're wrong if you believe this or that. It doesn't at all. It just starts posing these questions like we brought up tonight. Like, for example, why is it in almost 50 years, the furthest that they've gone is 400 miles? I mean, that's bizarre. That's bizarre. From anyone that's really conclusively looking into this, that is bizarre. You can't just say, well, they've never been back to the moon because they don't need to. I mean, these are things I hear all the time. But really, of all the space agencies out there, and they're telling us all these stories, really, they're only going to go a fraction of a percent. I mean, remember, they told us the moon is 240,000 miles. That's a 250,000 miles away, and yet they've only gone 400 miles. So these type of things, I just want people to be like, that's kind of weird. I'm going to look into that. And if one thing leads to another, and they start going, well, wait a minute, maybe I'm putting too much trust into NASA. Maybe I should just settle down on that a bit, and then look at some other things. So to me, it was more, and we're all guilty of that. We could all rise some agency or some man, or even a teacher for that matter. So don't listen to what I say. Don't listen to what anyone says. Obviously, test these things, read the Bible. But at the end of the day, I want people to just go on that journey, be hungry for the truth, because really the bottom of the truth is Jesus. And to me, that is the most important thing when it comes to this. But really, it just go down that journey, because again, it's incredible what happens when you just not afraid to say, you know what, I really want to find out. Because I think a lot of the things that we grew up with, we just take for granted. It just is what it is. I mean, nobody debates it. Nobody talks about it. So what happens when some people start to question it? It seems silly, but then all of a sudden more and more people start questioning it, and more and more people. And then that's all I'm seeing with this investigation. And I'm seeing people from every walk of life, different backgrounds. And, there's a lot of people starting to look into this. So unfortunately, there has been, unsavory characters, or maybe some people have been turned off where they've seen certain things or something. And, I apologize for that. But again, at the end of the day, don't let that even discourage you, because again, the truth is above people and personality.
There you go.
It's something that's important. So don't get hung up on what you see, or you saw a video by someone and they did this or that. Just go on your quest, pray, ask the Lord to lead you, and see, what comes of it. But I think that, honestly, anybody that starts to really dig into the Bible, nothing bad about that.
There you go. Go start the journey, everybody. Well, Robbie Davidson, thank you so much for coming on the show, buddy. And we are eagerly awaiting the second part of your documentary.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks again, guys. It's been a real,
all right, buddy. You have a great night, and we'll have to get you back on the show when the new one comes out.
Would love it.
Well, there you go, guys. Hope you enjoyed that. That was, again, it was a long time ago we recorded this interview, but it still remains relevant. I mean, I guess not much has changed in a month or so, but just an awesome guy with an awesome ministry, lots of awesome videos, awesome. So go make sure to check out his links there. We'll have them in the show notes. And also another thing, a lot of you already know that Gons and I have been doing an additional show. That's right. Your two favorite conspiracy pals doing another show called Canary Cry News Talk. Now, this is a separate feed. You have to subscribe to it separately. You can do that on iTunes or all the other places that you find Canary Cry Radio. But this is us on a weekly basis. We take some news stories you may have heard about, a lot, I think, you may not have heard about. And we talk about them with the lens of, this, our crazy minds. And, it's just another great way to get a little bit more of the truth in your life and, maybe visit some news stories that you haven't seen during the week. It's a great way to do it.
That's kind of our goal with that show is, try to give you guys some news items that, because there's the big cycle of politics and everything going on now, and everyone's attention is there and the drama there, and it's the biggest reality TV show in the world now.
Yes, and you can. It's like we do a viewing and reviewing party of the world reality show every week.
Exactly.
Yes.
I was going to say more so that we're kind of ignoring that part of it, or at least trying to move away from it and reporting some stuff that actually,
that's true.
Seems to be moving forward.
We get down and dirty. We've lately we've been tracking pretty consistently the rise of transhumanism in the public eye, which is actually it's going crazy, guys. If you want to keep track,
crazy.
Yeah, if you want to keep track of how transhumanism is being portrayed in the media, not just in like your HBO specials and your Westworlds and things like that, but transhumanists are making moves.
Yeah, something. This is a little, I guess, a nugget, right? At the end of this episode where we kind of dive into this, but like. Seriously, back in 2012 when we started this, what did I tell you? Remember we were talking and we were like, dude, transhumanism has to be the thing that we kind of
right. It's going to be the
show on, because it's going to happen.
Oh yeah, it's happening, and it's happening faster and faster. That includes, biotechnology, cyborgism,
Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg coming out,
yes,
with the
surveillance,
brain-computer interface,
yes, brain-computer interfacing, and all that
head
kind
transplants.
Of stuff. Yeah, it's getting crazy.
It's getting weird, guys.
So if you want to follow that and many more trends going on in the world right now that you may not get on your 6 o'clock news, go ahead and subscribe to Canary Cry News Talk. You're not going to hate it. I guarantee that. Now, one last thing we mentioned at the top of the show, the Joyspiracy Theory, my show that my show that I've been. We're back and rolling. I've got guests. We've got all sorts of great things going. It's got a slightly new spin to it, which I think everybody's been enjoying. Go check that out. And if you want to support Gons or I, and or either or both of Gons and I, these are real words I'm speaking, you can go to patreon.com/thejoyspiracy theory and or either and patreon.com/face like the sun. And that's just a great way. As we mentioned before, things are really cracking down on the internet and monetization, it's hard. We can't, it's getting harder. And Patreon is a great resource for creators like Gons and I, just to help to keep the ministry going. And as always, if you want to support Canary Cry Radio specifically, you can go to canarycryradio.com/support and get it on there.
That's right.
Is there anything else, Gons?
You know what? Let me just say that I've been using Twitter a lot more recently, and
that's true.
It's bringing out like such a dark side of me.
Oh gosh.
It feels like it's like seriously, it's like I feel like every time I post, I'm like, oh yeah, that made sense. But then I look back, I'm all, well, that seems kind of trollish. And then I realized Twitter itself is just everybody trolling. That's
just
all
a bunch of trolls. Yeah, so if you want to see the darker side of Gons, you can follow him on Twitter.
See the troll in Gons.
If you want to hear the about the joys in his life and his brand new baby, you can go to patreon.com/thejoyspiracy theory and get access to his bonus episode.
I ran into an atheist and a witch on Twitter. How crazy is that?
Yeah, go track those feeds, everybody. All right, everybody. We truly appreciate everybody for sticking with us, and we promise things are going to be moving a little faster here. And again, I know we talked kind of a lot about money this episode, but truly, if it wasn't for you guys, I literally would be homeless. So thank you very much. All right.
Amen.
Anything else, Gons? Any last words?
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Canary Cry Radio. Make sure to tune in next time. But until then, guys, think outside the cage.
Science to its rightful place and wield technology's wonders.
Ignorant just simply means you don't know. But if you don't know and you have the power of influence over others, that's dangerous. If you don't know and you don't know that you don't know, that is particularly dangerous.
There is no debate. Climate change is a fact.
Now, as for getting your morals from the Bible, I very sincerely hope nobody does.
Right now, we only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go. And this new system that we're building is going to allow us to go beyond and hopefully take humans into the solar system.
That Jesus is the Son of God who is redeeming humanity from original sin. The idea that we are born in sin, and the only way we can be redeemed from sin is through the death of Jesus. I mean, that's a horrible idea. Megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully.
So that's what you think of God?
Yeah.
How about the recent push to implement intelligent design in school curriculums?
It's very
dangerous.
bad. It's
dangerous.
Very dangerous.
Dangerous. You don't mess with the church.
You can see an agenda.
Now, one thing I really want your generation to embrace is that the earth is a closed system. We cannot leave the earth. There's no place to go.